The dress was not supposed to matter. Elara had told herself that every morning for the past week, while she stood in front of the small, cracked mirror in her room and practiced looking calm. She had practiced saying his name without her voice catching. She had practiced smiling at the idea of standing beside him in front of the whole pack, in front of every face that had watched her grow from a quiet child into a quieter woman. She had practiced being ready. None of it helped. The morning of the ceremony arrived cold and white, the way mornings do in November when the frost settles early and the trees lose the last of their color overnight. Elara woke before her alarm, before the birds, before the light had properly decided what it wanted to do with the sky. She lay still on her narrow bed and listened to the silence of the house around her, and felt something move in the center of her chest. Not quite excitement, not quite dread, but something that lived exactly between the two. She got up. She dressed carefully. The dress was pale gray, simple, the kind of thing that would not draw attention to itself. That was the point. Elara had learned early that drawing attention to herself only invited comparisons she could not win. She was not the prettiest woman in the Harrow pack. She was not the strongest, not the fastest, not the one people pointed to when they wanted an example of something admirable. What she was, had always been, was reliable, steady, the kind of woman who showed up early and stayed late, and never asked for credit, because asking for things had always felt like asking for disappointment. Caden Vale had noticed her 2 years ago at a Border Patrol meeting. He had handed her a file and their fingers had touched for less than a second, and she had felt the pull, that specific, unmistakable recognition that her wolf nature had been waiting her whole life to feel. A mate bond forming at its very first thread. He had looked at her then with something in his eyes she had decided, later, she had probably imagined. She had not imagined it. But what she had not understood, what she had spent 2 years carefully, willingly not understanding, was that a thread is not a rope. A beginning is not a promise. A moment of recognition between two people does not mean both people choose to follow where it leads. She walked to the ceremony grounds alone. The other women in the pack walked together, their voices bright and easy in the cold morning air. A few of them nodded to Elara as she passed. One of them, Nora, who had been her neighbor for 4 years and who sometimes left food on her doorstep when Elara was working too many shifts at the pack infirmary, caught her arm gently. "You look beautiful," Nora said. "I look gray," Elara said. "Gray suits you." Nora squeezed her hand. "He is going to look at you today and wonder what took him so long." Elara smiled. It felt like lifting something heavy. The ceremony ground was a wide clearing at the center of Harrow territory, ringed by old pine trees whose roots pushed up through the earth like the knuckles of buried fists. In summer it was a place for celebrations. In November it was a place for formality, for the serious business of pack life. Lanterns had been hung between the trees. Rows of stone benches filled the space, and those benches were filling with people, pack members in their good clothes, elders in their formal dark coats, children running between the legs of their parents before adults caught them and settled them down. Elara found her place near the back of the gathering. She had not been assigned a front seat. That had been one of the small signs she had chosen not to read. Caden arrived with his attendants at exactly the time the ceremony was scheduled to begin. He was tall, dark-haired, broad across the shoulders in the way that pack alphas tend to be, built for presence as much as strength. He wore a deep blue coat and his face was composed and formal and gave nothing away. Elara watched him cross the clearing and felt that pull again, fainter now than it had once been, like a song playing in a room 3 doors down. He did not look at her. She told herself he was focusing. She told herself he was nervous. She told herself many things in the 2 minutes it took for the ceremony elder to take his place at the front of the clearing and raise one hand for silence. Elder Voss was a small, thin man who had been conducting pack ceremonies longer than most of the people present had been alive. He had a voice that carried without effort, soft and exact, the kind of voice that made people lean forward without meaning to. "We gather," Elder Voss said, "for the formal binding recognition. Alpha Caden Vale of the Harrow Pack has declared a mate bond. Today we bear witness to that declaration, and to the name of his chosen." Elara's hands were folded in her lap. She could feel the cold of the bench through her dress. "The bond presented to the Pack Council for recognition," Elder Voss continued, "is between Alpha Caden Vale and—" He paused. Not for drama. He paused because he was reading from a document he had been given that morning, and he needed a moment to be sure he had read it correctly. "And Petra Hale, daughter of the Hale family of the Eastern Range." The name landed in the clearing, the way a stone lands in still water. A single impact, and then the ripples moving outward in every direction. Elara heard it. She understood it immediately. The way the mind sometimes understands terrible things before the heart has caught up. She understood every part of it, including all the parts she had kept herself from understanding for 2 years. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and felt the world reorganize itself around a new center that did not include her, and she did not move. And she did not make a sound, because she had spent her whole life practicing how to absorb things quietly. Petra Hale stepped forward from a group near the front. She was a woman Alara had seen at Interpack gatherings, taller than Alara, older by perhaps 3 years, with the kind of self-possessed stillness that came from never having had a reason to make herself small. She was not looking at the crowd, she was looking at Caden, and Caden was looking at her, and whatever passed between them in that look had nothing to do with Alara, and everything to do with a decision that had been made long before this morning. Nora was sitting 6 rows ahead of Alara. She turned around. When she found Alara's face, her own face did a complicated thing. Guilt and sorrow and something helpless. And Alara understood from that look alone that Nora had known, that some of them had known, that the only person who had not known was Alara. The pack around her stirred and shifted the way packs do when something unexpected happens. Whispered questions, turned heads, the low hum of collective processing. Some faces looked surprised, some did not. Elder Voss continued speaking. He said formal words about bonds and recognition and the strength of the pack. Alara heard the sounds without hearing the meaning. She was busy doing something that required most of her attention. She was holding the mate bond thread inside herself and watching it go quiet. A mate bond that was never claimed does not break. It does not make a sound. It simply stops. It is the quietest pain there is. She did not cry. She had cried before, when smaller things had hurt her, and she knew what it felt like to have tears come without warning. These did not come. What came instead was a kind of hollow, standing water stillness that she recognized from the worst moment of her childhood, from the day she had stood outside her father's door and heard him tell someone that she was a difficult girl to love. She was not going to give this clearing, these people, this morning, a version of herself that fell apart. She stood up. She did it slowly, the way she did everything, without drama, without announcement. She picked up her small bag from beside her feet. She walked along the outside edge of the benches toward the tree line. 1 or 2 people glanced at her. Caden did not look up. Elder Voss did not pause. She stepped into the trees. The noise of the ceremony faded behind her with each step, first muffled, then distant, then gone entirely. The pine forest was cold and still, and smelled of frost and bark, and the particular dark mineral smell of old earth. Her feet found a path she had walked many times, a patrol route she knew from years of early morning shifts, cutting east toward the outer boundary of Harrow territory. She walked for a long time without thinking. The first thought that came to her, when thought returned, was practical. She had savings, not much, but enough. She had skills the infirmary had given her, the kind that were useful anywhere. She had her wolf, even if her wolf was currently folded in on herself like a piece of paper someone had crumpled and not bothered to smooth out. She could leave Harrow territory. She could go somewhere that was not this. She could build something from whatever she had left. The second thought was harder. She did not know who she was if she was not waiting for Caden to choose her. She had organized so much of herself around that waiting. The way she had worked, the way she had made herself useful, the way she had carved herself down to a shape she thought he might want. She had been so careful. She had been so patient. And none of it had mattered, not 1 hour of it, because the choice had never been hers to influence. He had known what he was going to do, and he had let her go on not knowing, and she had helped him do it by believing. Every single morning in front of that cracked mirror, that patience was the same thing as being deserving. It was not the same thing. She stopped walking when she reached the eastern boundary marker, a tall stone post carved with the Harrow symbol that marked the edge of the territory. Beyond it was neutral land for about 3 miles, and then the edge of the Ashwood, which was old woodland that no pack claimed and no sensible wolf entered alone in November. Alara stood at the boundary stone and looked at what was behind her and what was ahead of her. Behind her was the ceremony. Caden's face looking at Petra Hale, Nora's guilty look, rows of people who had watched and known and said nothing. A narrow bed in a quiet house and 4 years of making herself useful and asking for nothing. Ahead of her was neutral land, and then old dark trees, and then whatever came after that. She crossed the boundary. She told herself she was just walking, clearing her head, that she would stop at the neutral land and turn back before dark. She told herself this the way she had told herself many things, with full awareness that she did not believe it, but with the specific human capacity for choosing a manageable lie over a truth too large to stand with. The neutral land was flat and scrubby, sparse trees and dead November grass, and the occasional frozen puddle that cracked under her feet. The sky above was low and gray, the color of old slate, pressing down. She walked through it without stopping. She reached the Ashwood edge just before noon. The trees there were different from the Harrow pines. They were older, darker, their trunks wider than two people could circle with their arms. The spaces between them were deep with shadow even in daylight. The Ashwood did not look dangerous the way a cliff edge looks dangerous, with obvious and visible threat. It looked the way old things look, indifferent, like something that had been here long before any pack had drawn boundaries on the land and would be here long after every one of those boundaries was forgotten. Elara stood at the edge and felt the cold coming off the trees. She went in. The sounds of the open land behind her, wind, distant birds, the small noises of open sky, cut off almost immediately once she was between the trees. The Ashwood had its own sounds, the slow creak of heavy branches, the occasional fall of something small through the canopy, her own breathing. The floor was thick with dead leaves and the soft collapse of old wood, and her feet were quieter here than they had been on the open ground. She walked for a while longer. The light changed slowly from gray to the particular gray-gold of late afternoon filtering through bare branches. She was cold but not dangerous cold. She had eaten nothing since the night before, and her body was starting to remind her of this with a dull, insistent ache behind her eyes. She found a fallen tree beside a frozen creek and sat down on it. She had run from a ceremony. She had crossed pack boundaries without permission, without a plan, without telling a single person where she was going. She was sitting alone in a stretch of forest that no pack maintained and no safe map covered. In November, with no food and no shelter, and the kind of hollow emptiness in her chest that made thinking feel like lifting stones. She did not, even then, feel that she had made a mistake. She felt cold. She felt tired. She felt the specific way a person feels when something they held for a very long time has finally been taken from them. Not broken exactly, but emptied out, like a jar that was full and is now clean and available and terrifyingly without purpose. She pulled her coat tighter. Above her, the canopy shifted and let through a thin slice of pale sky. Somewhere in the distance, on the other side of a ridge she could not see, a branch fell, with a sound like a door closing. She pressed the back of one hand against her mouth and held it there, and breathed. She did not cry. She did not rage. She sat on a fallen tree at the edge of a frozen creek in the middle of old woodland that nobody owned, and she was alone in the specific way that is different from loneliness, not the absence of people, but the presence of a self that has just learned how much space it takes up when it is not being made small for someone else's comfort. She would not go back tonight. That was not a decision so much as a recognition. She understood it the way she understood cold, not as a choice but as a fact of the body. She was not going back tonight, and she would need to find water and shelter before dark, and she would need to think about what came next in the careful, step-by-step way she had always thought about hard things, one foot in front of the other, no shortcuts and no pretending. She stood up from the fallen tree. Her legs were cold but steady. The woods pressed close and dark and old around her. She walked deeper in. The first night in the Ashwood was the longest Elara had ever lived through. She found shelter before dark, a place where 3 old trees had fallen together and made a low lean of bark and rotting wood that blocked the wind from the north. It was not a good shelter. It was a shelter in the same way that a hollow log is a shelter, which is to say it was marginally better than nothing, and she was grateful for it with the specific, uncomplicated gratitude of someone who has no other options. She gathered what dry material she could find in the fading light, bark strips, dead leaves packed into dense layers, a piece of fallen branch that she could tuck under the lean to keep herself off the frozen ground. She had done wilderness training as part of her infirmary rotations. She knew the basics. Her hands were clumsy with cold by the time she finished, but the structure held, and she crawled inside and pulled her coat around herself and closed her eyes, and did not sleep for several hours. She thought about Caden. She had told herself she would not, but the mind does what it wants in the dark, and what her mind wanted was to understand, because Elara had always been someone who needed to understand things. She went back through 2 years of memories with the careful attention of someone cataloging damage, looking for the moments she had misread, the places where she had chosen hope over evidence, the specific points at which she had been given information she had not wanted to receive and had set it aside. There were more of them than she had allowed herself to know. The time he had spoken to her for 40 minutes at a pack meeting and then walked away without introducing her to the alpha from the northern ridge who had been standing beside them. She had told herself he was distracted. The time she had brought him a report he had asked for, and he had taken it without looking at her. and she had stood in his doorway for a moment, waiting for something she could not name, and he had started reading the report, and she had left. She had told herself he was busy. The times, which were not rare, when she had felt the mate bond thread tighten with some new feeling, and then go quiet again, as if on the other end someone kept picking up a telephone and then putting it down before speaking. She had told herself so many things. At some point during the night she slept without meaning to, the cold and the exhaustion combining to pull her under despite herself. She dreamed about nothing, which was a mercy. She woke to pale light and the sound of water moving nearby and the brief, confused certainty that she was in her own room, and that everything that had happened yesterday had been a dream. Then the bark and the cold and the ache in her back arrived, and she knew where she was. She lay still for a moment. Then she got up. The creek she had heard all night was about 30 meters through the trees, a thin black line between frozen banks. She crouched at its edge and broke the thin ice with a stick and drank, and the water was clean and cold and real, and she held it in her mouth for a second before swallowing, because it was the only thing she had, and she wanted to be sure it was there. She needed to move. Her body was stiff from the cold and the ground and the complete absence of warmth, and the best thing for stiffness is motion, so she walked. And she followed the creek north because north was up and up felt better than down, and because the creek told her where the water came from and where it might lead, and because in the absence of any plan at all, following a moving thing is at least a direction. The ashwood in the morning was different from the ashwood in the previous afternoon. The light was thin and cold and came through the bare canopy at a low angle, stretching shadows out long across the forest floor. There were birds, not many, but a few, moving through the upper branches and making small, sharp sounds that felt outsized in the quiet. Her feet moved through old leaves and frozen mud and the occasional soft collapse of a rotten branch she had not seen. She thought about food. This was a practical thought, the kind she was good at. She had been in the woods for less than 24 hours, and her hunger was real but not urgent. She had another day or two before it became a serious problem. In that time she needed either to find her way to a settlement. There were small communities on the far edge of the neutral territory. She knew that much from pack boundary reports. Or she needed to find something she could safely eat in the forest. November was not a generous time of year. The berries were gone. The plants were dormant. She was not, she admitted to herself, in a position where being picky was an option. She was working through this calculation, calm, methodical, the way she worked through everything, when she heard the sound. It was not a sound she could immediately identify. A movement, low and close and deliberate, somewhere in the trees to her left and slightly behind her. Not an animal. Animals in the ashwood in November moved in particular ways, fast and small, or slow and large. This was neither. This was careful, measured, the movement of something that did not want to be heard and therefore almost was not, except that Alara had very good hearing, which was one of the things she had in the place of other things she had not been given. She stopped walking. The sound stopped. She stood absolutely still beside the creek and waited, and let her wolf nature extend outward the way it sometimes did when she was paying close attention, a kind of widening of perception that was not exactly smell and not exactly sound, but was some combination of both and something else besides. Someone was watching her from the trees. She turned. There was a man standing between two large oaks about 20 meters away. He was partially in shadow, which was why she had not seen him before she heard him, because someone standing in shadow in November, wearing dark clothing against dark bark, requires specific attention to see. He was very tall, taller than Caden, taller than most men she knew, and his coat was heavy and dark and he had not moved when she turned, which was either calm or threat and she could not yet tell which. "You are on no pack's land," he said. His voice was low and even, not warm exactly but not cold either, the kind of voice that did not need volume to be heard. "I know," Alara said. "You crossed from Harrow territory yesterday." It was not a question, she noticed that. "Yes," she said. "Alone." "Yes." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not read from this distance. Then he moved, a single unhurried step out of the shadow, and she saw his face properly for the first time. He was perhaps 30, perhaps a few years older, with the kind of features that did not draw attention to individual parts but produced, collectively, a result that required a moment to process. His eyes were dark, a gray so deep it was almost black in this light, and they were looking at her with the direct, uncomfortable attention of someone who was not in the habit of looking away from things. "You slept by those 3 fallen oaks last night," he said. Alara did not answer immediately, because she was deciding whether this was a threat. "You were not watching me," she said finally. "I would have known." "You would have," he said. "I found your shelter this morning. It was well made for what you had to work with. She looked at him steadily. What are you doing in the Ashwood? I could ask you the same question with considerably more right, he said, and there was something in his tone, not quite a smile, but the shape of one, that made her uncertain about him in a new and different way. My reasons are my own, she said. They are, he said, and they are none of my concern. What is my concern is that you are alone in Old Woodland in November with no supplies, and the temperature is going to drop again tonight, and the next settlement in the direction you are walking is 11 miles from here. She had not known the distance was 11 miles. She had suspected it was far, but she had not known the number, and hearing it stated plainly made something in her stomach shift. I am fine, she said, which they both knew was not entirely true. You are cold and you have not eaten, he said, and your wolf is quiet. He paused. That last part concerns me more than the others. The way he said it, not as an observation meant to unsettle her, but as a statement of genuine concern, stopped the defensive response she had been forming. She looked at him and he looked at her, and the creek moved between them, and neither of them spoke for a moment. Why does it concern you? She asked. A wolf that has gone quiet after a pack ceremony is not resting, he said. It is injured, and injured wolves are not good judges of how far they can walk alone in the cold. Elara felt something move in her chest at the words pack ceremony, a brief, sharp tightening that she compressed immediately. She did not know this man. She did not know how he knew about the ceremony. She did not know what he wanted. Who are you? She asked. Someone with a fire, he said, and food, and a roof. That is not what I asked. No, he said. It is not. He held her gaze. My name is Kale. The offer is real, no conditions attached, and you are free to refuse it, but I suggest you do not. Elara considered him. She was good at reading people. It was one of the skills that years in an infirmary had sharpened, the ability to assess quickly without showing that she was doing it. What she read in this man was not threat. What she read was something more complicated. Control. Not the control of someone containing danger, but the control of someone who was accustomed to being the steadiest thing in whatever room they were in. She did not know what to do with that. She had spent 2 years beside a man whose steadiness had turned out to be performance. She was not inclined to trust the appearance of it again quickly. I do not know you, she said. No, he said. But you know the cold, and you know how long you have been walking, and you know your wolf is not well. He tilted his head slightly. Which of those facts is the one you want to argue with? She could not argue with any of them. She followed him. He did not speak while they walked, which she was grateful for because she had no capacity for conversation. He moved through the Ashwood with the ease of someone who was at home in it. Not quickly, but without the constant small hesitations of someone navigating unfamiliar ground. He did not look back to check if she was following. He simply walked, and she walked behind him, and the creek fell away to their left, and the trees thickened and then opened again into a stretch of older forest where the trunks were so wide they cast shadows like small buildings. The cabin appeared between two of those enormous trunks, as if it had always been there. It was not large. One room visible from outside, stone base, wood upper walls, a chimney from which actual smoke was rising in a thin, pale line. Around it was a cleared space, wood stacked neatly against one wall, and a smaller structure nearby that was probably for storage. The place had the look of somewhere that was used regularly and maintained carefully but did not announce itself. Kale opened the door and stepped aside. Elara walked in. The heat of the fire hit her like a physical thing. After the cold of the woods, it was almost overwhelming. She felt her face and hands react to it, a painful tingling as blood returned to places it had retreated from during the night. She stood just inside the door and did not move for a moment, just breathing warm air. The cabin was simple. A fireplace with a good fire, a table, 2 chairs, a bed in the far corner, a second mat rolled out beside it, a set of shelves with supplies arranged with the kind of precise organization that spoke of someone who lived alone and had decided how things should be done, and did them that way consistently. There was a pot over the fire that was producing a smell so uncomplicated and necessary that Elara's body responded to it before her mind did. Soup. Simple, good soup. Sit, Kale said. He moved to the fire without ceremony and ladled something into a bowl and put it on the table. Elara sat. She picked up the bowl without thinking about it and wrapped both hands around it and held it. The warmth spread through her palms and up her arms, and she closed her eyes for a moment. Just one moment. When she opened them, Kale was sitting in the second chair across the table from her, and he was not looking at her. He was looking at the fire, as if he had decided that the polite thing to do while she recovered herself was to look somewhere else. and had done it without ceremony or announcement. She ate the soup. It was simple, broth and root vegetables and something that might have been dried herbs, and it was the best thing she had tasted in years, which was not about the soup. When she put the empty bowl down, he looked at her. "Sleep," he said. "You need it more than you need to explain anything." She wanted to say she did not need to be told what she needed. She wanted to say she had questions about who he was, and why he was here, and how he knew what he knew. She wanted to say many things, but what came out was very small. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. He picked up his own bowl and moved his chair closer to the fire, angling it so his back was to the room. Ilara looked at the mat beside the bed. She looked at Cale's back, steady and still and utterly unconcerned. She lay down on the mat and pulled the blanket that was folded at its end over herself, and stared at the ceiling of the cabin, which was rough wood and firelight and shadow. Her wolf, which had been folded in and silent since the clearing, moved, barely, the smallest possible shift, like something underground turning in its sleep. Ilara said nothing about this. She closed her eyes. She slept within minutes, which was the most surprising thing that had happened to her since she walked into the woods, and the most honest. She woke in the dark with her hand on her knife. She had not arrived with a knife. She became aware of this in the slow, cotton-edged way the mind works in the first seconds after sleep, reaching for a weapon that was not there, fingers closing on empty air, body already prepared for a threat that the eyes had not yet confirmed. The cabin was quiet. The fire had burned down to embers, throwing a low red glow across the room. Cale was in the bed, his back to her, the slow rise and fall of his breathing the only sound. Everything was exactly as she had left it before sleep had taken her without warning, and the knife she had grabbed for was not her knife but the small folding blade she used to keep in her left boot when she did night patrol, the one she had stopped carrying 18 months ago when she moved off the patrol rotation and into full-time infirmary work. She had not thought about that knife in 18 months. Her hands had remembered it without asking. She lay back down and stared at the ceiling and tried to understand why her body was prepared for something her mind had not been warned about. The wolf. That was the answer, and she knew it the moment she thought to ask the question. Her wolf had stirred twice now in the past several hours. Once when Cale had carried her bowl to the table, once during a dream she could not remember, and the wolf's instincts were older and faster than the mind's, and they were telling her something she was not yet ready to hear. She closed her eyes, forced the thought down. When she woke the second time it was morning, gray light at the window, and Cale was already up. She could hear him outside. The sound of wood being split, regular and unhurried, the crack of each blow clean in the cold air. She lay still for a moment longer than she needed to, then sat up. Her body ached in the specific way of someone who has slept on a hard floor after being cold and exhausted, and she took a careful breath and stretched her back and stood. The fire had been restarted. There was water heating in a small pot. She found a cloth beside it that she used to wash her face and hands, and the warmth of the water was another small mercy in the accumulation of small mercies this strange man kept providing without comment. She was pouring herself a cup of water from a larger container on the shelf when the door opened and Cale came in. He was carrying an armful of split wood, which he set down beside the fireplace with the unhurried precision she was already starting to recognize as characteristic of how he did most things. He looked at her briefly, checked the fire, added 2 pieces of wood. "How long were you awake in the night?" he asked. She had not expected that to be the first thing he said. "A few minutes," she said. He nodded as if she had confirmed something. He moved to the shelf and took down a wrapped parcel and opened it on the table. Dried meat, hard bread, something that turned out to be pressed fruit of some kind, dark and dense. "Eat," he said. "You keep saying that," she said. "You keep needing it." She sat down and ate, because he was right, and arguing against right things was a waste of energy. He sat across from her and ate as well, slowly, and without any appearance of self-consciousness about the silence. She had known people who could not tolerate silence, who filled it the moment it appeared with words that did not mean anything. Cale appeared to be someone for whom silence was simply the default state of things, and words were for when they were necessary. She found this both easier and more difficult than she expected. Easier because she did not have to perform for it. Harder because in the absence of small talk there was nothing to do but think, and thinking kept returning her to the same places she did not want to visit. "You said last night that my wolf was quiet," she said. He looked up from his food. "Yes." "How did you know that? Without touching me, without getting close?" He considered the question for a moment in a way that told her he was deciding how much of the answer to give, which was interesting because most people either answered or deflected, and he was doing neither. I have been doing this long enough to recognize the signs, he said. There is a particular quality to the way a person moves when their wolf is not with them. It looks like tiredness from the outside, but it is not tiredness. It is more like, he paused, looking for the word, like someone who is right-handed trying to do everything with their left. You can do it, but nothing moves quite the way it should. Alara set down her piece of bread. That is accurate, she said. I know. She looked at him. Have you experienced it? A long pause, not the considering pause from before, something different, a carefully maintained stillness that was not the same as ease. Once, he said, a long time ago. She did not push. She recognized the boundary of that answer and she left it there. There is a stream, about 400 meters east, he said after a moment, the shift in subject clean and deliberate. Deeper water there, moving fast enough to stay unfrozen. Useful if you want to be more comfortable. She understood what he meant without needing it explained. She had been in yesterday's dress since before the ceremony. She nodded once. There is an extra coat on the hook by the door, he said. The one you came in is not warm enough for long outside. She looked at the hook. The coat there was large, clearly made for him, dark wool that had been through many winters. I am fine, she said. The temperature has dropped since last night, he said. Take the coat. He said it the way she imagined someone would say it if they were used to giving directions that were followed, not because of authority exactly, but because they were correct and everyone involved knew it. She took the coat. The stream was where he said it was, and the cold was indeed worse than the previous day. She was glad for the coat, which came down to her knees and was warm in a way that felt structural rather than decorative. She washed quickly, teeth clenched against the cold of the water, and then stood at the stream's edge for a moment and looked up through the bare branches at the sky, which was low and white and undecided about snow. She needed to think about what she was doing. She had come into the Ashwood on impulse and had found, by what seemed like luck but felt somehow more intentional, a man with a fire and food and a roof who had asked nothing of her. She could not stay here indefinitely. She had no claim on this place or this person. She needed to decide where she was going and begin moving toward it. The problem was that she did not know where she was going. She had no family to return to. Her parents had died when she was 12 and she had grown up in a series of pack communal arrangements that had been adequate and cold in equal measure. She had the infirmary skills, but using them meant aligning with a pack, and aligning with a pack meant explaining why she had left the last one, and explaining that was something she was not prepared to do today. She had a small amount of money in an account that she could access if she reached a settlement. 11 miles, Cale had said. She could walk 11 miles. She had walked farther. The cold was the issue, and the fact that her wolf was still very quiet, and the fact that something in her chest had not properly settled since she sat on that fallen log yesterday, and understood what the rest of her life was going to have to be built from. She put her hands in the pockets of Cale's coat and walked back to the cabin. He was inside when she returned, at the table, writing in a small book with a careful, close hand. He looked up when she came in. He looked at the coat, and the fact of it being on her, and then looked back at his book without comment. She hung it on the hook and sat in the second chair and looked at the fire. How long have you been in the Ashwood? She asked. A few weeks, he said. Alone? Yes. Why? He set down his pen. He looked at her with the direct, even look she was starting to understand was simply how he looked at things, not a challenge, not an inspection, just the specific attention of someone who had decided that looking away from things was not a habit worth keeping. I needed to think about something, he said. What kind of something? The kind that is easier to think about with fewer people around. She accepted this. It was an answer she understood instinctively, given everything. Are you going back, she asked, to wherever you came from? A pause. Eventually. And until then, you are here. Until then, he said. She looked around the cabin, the shelves with their neat supplies, the fire, the 2 chairs at the table. She thought about 11 miles in dropping temperature with a wolf that would not come when called, and a chest full of something she had not finished processing. I need a few days, she said, to decide what I am doing next. She had not planned to say it. It arrived as a full sentence before she had thought it through, which was unusual for her. He looked at her for a moment. All right, he said. Just those 2 words. No condition, no visible hesitation. All right, the way you say all right when someone asks a reasonable thing, and you see no reason to refuse it. She nodded. The knot behind her sternum loosened a fraction. You can have the bed, she said. The mat is fine. The mat is fine for you, he said. I already slept on it. And you will sleep better in the bed. He picked up his pen again. Do not argue about things that do not matter. Ilara opened her mouth, closed it, looked at the fire. You are very sure of yourself, she said. I am sure of a few things, he said. The temperature outside and the quality of your sleep are two of them. She looked at him sideways. What is the book you are writing in? He glanced down at it. Notes. About what? Things I need to remember. She waited, but that was the complete answer. She let it go. The day passed in the particular way of days spent mostly inside in cold weather, slow and quiet and punctuated by small practical things. She helped without being asked, which was her natural instinct in any shared space. She kept the fire fed and found the covered store of root vegetables outside, and understood without needing to be told that she should make herself useful. She cooked a simple meal in the afternoon, the kind of practical meal that required no creativity, only attention, and Cale ate it without comment except to say when she asked that it was good. He was gone for a portion of the afternoon, outside for hours, and she heard nothing that indicated where he went or what he was doing. She did not ask when he returned. That too seemed like the edge of something she should not press on yet. In the evening they sat by the fire. He read from a worn book she did not ask about. She sat with her hands in her lap and listened to the fire and thought about Caden less than she expected to, and about the woman Petra Hale even less than that. She thought instead about the ceremony clearing and about her own feet walking away from it, and about the specific decision that had been, at its heart, not about running from something but about refusing to stay somewhere she had never been chosen. That distinction felt important. She was thinking about it, turning it over slowly in her mind the way you turn over something you have found and are deciding whether to keep, when Cale, without looking up from his book, said, "You did the right thing." She looked at him. "Leaving," he said. She did not know how he knew what she was thinking about. She did not ask. "I don't know yet," she said. "You do," he said. "You just don't trust yourself to know it." He turned a page. She looked back at the fire. Her wolf, somewhere in the deep quiet of herself, turned over again in its sleep, warmer this time, still not fully awake, but warmer. Ilara noticed, said nothing. Outside, the snow the sky had been promising all day began to fall, soft and steady, settling on the roof of the cabin, and on the bare trees of the ashwood, and on the frozen ground, covering everything that had been there before with a clean, white, unremarkable layer. She watched it through the window for a while. Then she went to sleep in the bed, which was exactly as much better than the mat as Cale had said it would be, and she hated how completely he had been right about that too. She had not said goodnight to him. She realized this from the bed, in the dark, with the fire burned low and his breathing, even from the mat on the floor. The omission felt strange, not because she owed him ceremony, but because she had been raised to do small things correctly, to say goodnight, and thank you, and good morning, to mark the edges of things with the right words. Her mother had been firm about that. She lay in the warmth of the bed, and thought about her mother, which was something she almost never allowed herself to do. Her mother had been a quiet woman, a careful woman, a woman who had known how to make a house feel safe, without raising her voice or filling the air with noise. She had died of a fever when Ilara was 12, one of those fast, brutal illnesses that comes in 3 days and takes everything and does not apologize, and Ilara had been on her own after that in every way that mattered. She had become careful the way her mother was careful. She had become useful the way her mother was useful. She had learned to make herself easy to keep because she had understood, at 12, that a child who was easy to keep had better odds than a child who was not. She had never stopped doing it. She was thinking about this, about the long habit of making herself convenient, of occupying the least possible space, of asking for nothing in case the asking reminded people that she was there to be asked of, when she became aware that the breathing from the mat had changed. Cale was awake. She did not know how she knew this. The sound was almost identical to sleep breathing, but something in the quality of the silence around it had shifted, the way the silence shifts when someone in a room changes from one state to another even if they do not move. "You are thinking very loudly," he said, quietly, from the mat. She stared at the ceiling. "I am sorry." "Don't be," he said. "I was awake already." A pause. "What woke you?" she asked. A pause from his side. "The snow stopped," he said. She listened. He was right. The soft, almost inaudible presence the falling snow had made all evening was gone. The night was absolutely still. She had not consciously registered the sound of the snow while it was happening, but she registered its absence now, and apparently so had he. "You hear that?" she said. "Yes." I didn't notice it until it stopped. Most people don't, he said. That is how it works with most things. She was not sure if he meant snow or something else. She did not ask. Good night, she said. A moment. Then, good night. She pulled the blanket up and closed her eyes, and this time she went to sleep in under a minute, and she did not reach for a knife she did not have, and she did not dream, and for one whole night, with the snow settled quiet on the roof above her, she did not think about Caden Vale at all. That was the first morning she woke up without his name being the first word in her mind. She marked it the way she marked small recoveries, not with celebration, but with quiet, careful gratitude, the way you press a bruise and find it has stopped hurting quite so much as the day before. She did not make a large thing of it. She got up, she started the fire, but she knew what it meant. On the third morning, Alara made a mistake. It was a small mistake, the kind that is invisible to everyone except the person who makes it, and it revealed something she had not been ready to know about herself. She was at the fire making tea from dried herbs she had found on the supply shelf, chamomile and something else, something sharp and medicinal, and she had filled 2 cups without thinking, one for herself and one for Kale, and set them on the table the way you set a cup of tea for someone you have lived with long enough to know how they take it, and she had not known she was doing it until she stepped back and saw the 2 cups sitting there and understood what the action meant. She stood very still with her hands at her sides. She had been here 3 days. She knew almost nothing about this man except his name, and the fact that he did not waste words and was right about things with an frequency that was quietly infuriating. She had not made tea for another person in years. She had not made tea for Caden, not once. Not because she had not wanted to, but because she had always waited to be invited into that kind of everyday intimacy, and the invitation had never come. She had not waited here. She had not thought about it. Her hands had simply done it. She picked up one of the cups and moved it back to the shelf. She sat down with the remaining one and drank it standing, looking at the fire. Kale came in from outside 20 minutes later, with snow on his shoulders. He looked at the shelf and the single cup there, and then at her, and she watched him understand in a single second exactly what had happened and exactly why the cup was back on the shelf. She saw this understanding move through his face like light through water, present for a moment, then gone, replaced by neutral stillness. He said nothing about it. He poured water for himself from the larger container and sat down and opened his book and picked up his pen, and that was the end of it. She was more grateful for this than she could reasonably explain. They had established, over the 3 days, a kind of routine that neither of them had discussed. She kept the fire, he sourced and split the wood, she cooked, he went out for portions of the afternoon and came back with whatever the ashwood offered. Occasionally a bird, once a rabbit, always wood, and once, inexplicably, a small jar of honey that he set on the shelf without explanation, and she did not ask for one. They ate together and did not speak much over the food, and in the evenings they sat by the fire and she thought and he read, and occasionally one of them would say something and the other would respond, and then they would be quiet again. It was the most comfortable she had been in years. This fact disturbed her in a way she could not fully articulate and spent a great deal of time not examining too directly. On the 4th day she asked him something she had been building toward since the first morning. "How did you know about the ceremony?" she said. He looked up from what he was doing, sharpening the small knife he used for cutting food and rope and whatever else needed cutting. "What? When you found me, you said I had crossed from Harrow territory. You said I had been alone since the ceremony. How did you know about it?" He set the knife down. "Word moves," he said. "Across the ashwood?" "I was not inside the ashwood the day before I found you," he said. "I had business near the neutral territory boundary. I heard from people in the border area that there had been an unusual ceremony at Harrow. Unusual because someone had left it early. It is not common to leave a binding ceremony." She looked at her hands. "No, it is not. I noticed your tracks the same afternoon," he said. "I followed them to your shelter." "You followed my tracks," she said flatly. "To make sure you were alive," he said. "Not because I wanted anything from you. Old woodland in November, alone, with no supplies." He picked up the knife again. "Some things are concerning regardless of what the other person wants." She thought about this. It was not comfortable, knowing that she had been observed and had not known it, but she could not find in it any particular malice, and malice was the thing that would have concerned her. "You waited until morning to approach," she said. "Yes. Why?" He looked at her with the patient directness she was getting used to. "Because you were asleep, and people who are fleeing something need to sleep without someone waking them." Alara looked at the window. Outside the ashwood was white and still under a settled layer of snow. She had been here 4 days and the world outside had gotten quieter and colder and more present, the way the world does when the noise of ordinary life falls away and what is left is just weather and ground and the sound of your own breathing. "What was the business you had near the neutral territory?" she asked. A pause. "A boundary matter." "Whose boundary?" He looked at her steadily. "One I have responsibility for." She waited. He did not add to it. She noted the precision of the phrasing. "Not one that belongs to me, but one I have responsibility for," and filed it away without comment. "You are not a simple traveler," she said. "No," he said. "Are you pack-bound?" A slight, deliberate pause before the answer. Not in the conventional sense. She had been in pack structures long enough to know what that meant, and also what it did not mean. It was the kind of answer a man gives when he is affiliated with something too large to describe simply, or too private to describe to someone he has known 4 days. "All right," she said. He looked at her. She thought she saw something cross his face, a fragment of surprise perhaps, at her willingness to leave it. "You are not going to push on that?" he said. "You will tell me when you think I should know," she said. "Or you won't. Either way, it doesn't change the fact that you found me, and brought me somewhere warm, and fed me for 4 days without asking for anything." She met his eyes. "I am capable of gratitude without complete information." He was quiet for a moment. "Most people are not," he said. "I know," she said. "I spent a long time trying to be one of the ones who were." He looked at her for a moment longer than was casual. Then he looked back down at the knife. It was on the 5th day that she noticed the first thing she could not explain. She had gone out to the storage structure beside the cabin to find more of the dried herbs she had been using for tea, because after 5 days she had worked through what was on the shelf, and replenishing things felt like the right thing to do with her time. The storage structure was unlocked, practical, organized with the same precision as the cabin's shelves, and on one of those shelves, among the wrapped provisions and tools, was a small wooden box. She would not have opened it. It was not hers, and she had not survived this long by touching things that were not hers. But the lid was already slightly open, not much, barely the width of a finger, and she could see inside without touching it. What was inside looked like documents. Papers, folded with care, bearing the kinds of seals she had seen on official pack correspondence during her time in the infirmary and on patrol reports. Pack seals were specific and identifiable. Most wolves who had worked in administrative capacities could identify a region's seal by its design. She looked at the visible seal for a moment. Then she looked away and found the herbs and went back to the cabin. She did not mention the box, but she thought about it for the rest of the day with the quiet, methodical attention she gave to things that felt important but had not yet revealed their shape. Pack seals on documents in a wooden box in a store in the Ashwood. A man who spoke about boundaries as responsibilities, and who knew the distance to every settlement, and who moved through old woodland as if he had walked it his whole life. A man who had woken when the snow stopped falling because silence was a thing he paid attention to. She was a person who had survived by reading situations correctly, and this situation was telling her something she had not yet been given the words for. On the evening of the 5th day they were both inside, and the fire was large because the cold had deepened and the snow had started again, and Cale had looked at the sky through the window in the afternoon with an expression she was starting to recognize as the face he made when something required his attention, but he was choosing to deal with it at the appropriate time rather than immediately. She was mending the hem of her dress, which had torn somewhere in the first day's walking, using a needle and thread she had found in the cabin's supplies. She was doing it badly, because she had never been good at sewing, and she knew it, and she was doing it anyway, because the alternative was sitting with her hands empty. "You are going to make it worse," Cale said. "I know," she said. He held out his hand. She looked at it, looked at his face, looked at her terrible mending job. She handed him the dress. He mended it in the time it took her to pour herself a second cup of tea. 3 minutes, maybe 4, the needle moving with the same economy he brought to everything. He handed it back without any expression that suggested he found the situation notable. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked. "A long time ago," he said. She folded the dress. "You say that about a lot of things." "Most things worth knowing were learned a long time ago," he said. She looked at him over her cup. "How old are you?" The corners of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the shape one makes when surprised by the directness of a question, and finds it acceptable rather than unwelcome. "Older than I look," he said. "That is not an answer." "No," he said. "It isn't." He looked at the fire. "I am 34. She had been right about approximately 30. She let it settle. "I am 26, she said. though he had not asked. He nodded. Kale, she said, and something about saying his name, the first time she had used it she realized, since the first day, made him look at her directly. I want to stay until the snow passes. I don't know how long that will be. I am not going to stop asking you questions, and I am going to make myself useful while I am here, and you are not going to be able to get rid of me by being quiet at me, because quiet doesn't bother me. He looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said. I noticed. She nodded. She turned back to the fire. Outside, the snow came down steady and thick and uninterrupted, and the ashwood was silent under its weight, and the cabin was warm, and somewhere beneath the conversation and the fire and the mended dress and the 2 cups on the table, one of which she had put there herself without thinking, and this time had not moved, something was assembling itself out of pieces that had not yet been given their names. She did not push. She had learned that pushing only worked on things that were ready to move. She sat with it, and it sat with her. The snow did not pass for 3 more days. Ilara used them. She catalogued the cabin the way she used to catalogue a patient when they came into the infirmary, with systematic attention, building up a picture from small details. She noted that Kale owned nothing decorative. Every object had a function. The single exception was a small flat stone on the top shelf, dark gray with a white line running through it, the kind of stone that comes from a riverbed and is carried for years in a pocket, until the smooth of it becomes as familiar as a fingerprint. She did not touch it. She noticed it was the only thing he had not organized into usefulness. She noted that he woke before light every morning without apparent effort, that he checked the perimeter of the cleared space around the cabin each afternoon, not with the visible anxiety of someone expecting threat, but with the consistent habit of someone who had decided long ago that regular attention prevented most emergencies, that he read quickly and retained things. She had begun testing this, asking him a day after he had mentioned something whether he remembered the detail, and he always did. She noted that he had not once, in 5 days, asked her a direct personal question. She had asked him several. He had answered with varying degrees of completeness. He had not reciprocated. This was not the behavior of someone incurious about her. She was increasingly certain that he was, in fact, paying quite close attention to everything she said and did. It was the behavior of someone who had decided that asking was a kind of pressure, and he was not going to apply pressure to something that was already under enough. She thought about this on the 7th morning, while the snow finally slowed and the light outside turned from gray to a pale, watery gold, the light that means the weather has broken. She could leave today. She sat with that thought and felt its edges. She had been thinking about practical things, the settlements, the money, what to do next. But she had been thinking about them in the abstract, as future problems. The thought of leaving the cabin today, of walking 11 miles through snow toward a settlement, of beginning the actual business of constructing a new life, arrived with a weight she had not fully anticipated. She was at the table with her hands around her cup when Kale came in and looked at the window, and the changed light, and then at her. "The snow has stopped," he said. "Yes," she said. He poured his own cup and sat down across from her, and they were quiet for a moment. "You can wait for the paths to clear," he said. "Tomorrow will be easier walking than today." She looked at him. "You are not telling me to go." "No," he said. "But you are not telling me to stay either." He looked at his cup. "That is not my place." She thought about this. About place, and the word he had chosen, and what it meant from a man who seemed very clear on what his place was in most situations. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer me honestly, even if the honest answer is that you don't know." He looked at her. "Do you know what is happening between us?" she said. The question sat in the air between them. She had not planned to ask it today. She had not planned to ask it in those exact words. But she was a person who had spent 2 years not asking the things she needed to ask, and she was not prepared to do that again. Kale was very still, not uncomfortable. She would have recognized discomfort. He was still the way water is still when there is no wind, which is its natural state rather than a suppression of movement. "Yes," he said. One word. Exactly the answer she had not been sure she would get. "And," she said. He looked at her with the direct, unflinching attention she had come to understand was not scrutiny, but something closer to respect. "And it is yours to decide what to do with," he said. "It is not mine to push toward or away from." She looked at the table. "It is not only mine." "No," he agreed. "But you arrived here 3 days after a rejection. What you feel now is real, but it is also sitting on top of other things, and I am not willing to let the other things be covered over before you have had a chance to see them clearly." She was quiet for a long time. Outside, a branch heavy with snow let its load drop with a soft collapse. The fire crackled. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and chamomile tea, and the cold outdoor air he had carried in on his coat. "That is either very wise," she said, "or a way of telling me nothing while appearing to tell me something." Something in his face shifted, and this time it was unmistakably a smile. Not wide, not performed, but real. It changed his face in a way that made her understand how rarely it appeared and what it cost him. "Both are possible," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she looked at the window. "I will leave tomorrow," she said. He nodded. "I would like to know where you came from," she said, "so that I know where you are, when I have decided about the other things." He looked at her carefully. "That is a complicated thing to share." "I know," she said. "Share it anyway." A long pause. Then he set down his cup and looked at her with an expression she could not quite name. Something between decision and inevitability, as if two things had been moving toward each other for a while, and had simply arrived. "I will," he said, "but not today." "Tomorrow then," she said, "before I go." "Tomorrow," he said. She stood up and took her cup to the shelf and rinsed it and set it down. She could feel his gaze on her back, steady, not pressing, just present. She turned around. "Thank you," she said, "for the fire and the food and the roof and the mending." He looked at her. "And for not asking questions," she said. His expression did something careful and controlled that she recognized, from her medical training, as the face a person makes when they are containing something they have decided the moment is not right to release. "Get some sleep," he said. "You also," she said. She went to the bed. She did not sleep for a long time. She lay in the warmth and listened to the fire settle and thought about tomorrow, and what he was going to tell her, and what she was going to do with it. And in the space between one thought and the next, she fell asleep, and the night passed over her like water over a stone, and in the morning, everything was going to be different. She did not know this yet, but she felt it, in the way her wolf was no longer folded in on itself but sitting upright in the quiet of her, alert and patient and waiting. That was how it always started, she thought. Not with a decision but with an awakening. Not with a choice but with the understanding that a choice was about to become necessary. She was ready. She had not been ready for a very long time. The morning arrived clear and cold and so bright off the snow that Alara had to shade her eyes when she opened the door. The Ashwood after a snowfall was a different place from the Ashwood in any other season. The weight of white on every branch smoothed the forest into something still and heavy and almost silent. The kind of silence that has texture to it, that presses against the ears like something physical. Under it the trees were dark and enormous. Her breath came out in clouds. The cold was sharp but not cruel, the clean cold of a settled morning rather than the vindictive cold of moving weather. She stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at it. Then she went back inside and put the kettle on, because Cale was not yet up and tea was the right thing to make before a hard conversation. He came in from outside 20 minutes later. He had been checking the perimeter, the habit she had catalogued, and he stopped when he saw the 2 cups on the table. He looked at her. "I meant to make 2, she said. "So I did." He looked at the cups for a moment. Something crossed his face, quick and careful and gone before she could fully read it. He sat down and took the cup and drank from it. She sat across from him and waited, because she had said yesterday and she meant it, and she was not going to let him reconstruct the distance of ordinary morning around the thing he had promised to tell her. He set down the cup. "I need you to understand," he said, "that I am telling you this because you asked, and because you deserve the truth, not because I want you to be impressed by it." That phrasing, the specific care of it, told her more than she expected. "I understand," she said. He looked at the table. "My full name is Cale Dorn." He paused, and the pause had weight. "I am the Alpha King." The words arrived in the cabin, the way cold air arrives through a sudden gap in a wall. Immediate, physical, undeniable. Alara looked at him. He looked back at her. She thought about the sealed documents in the wooden box. The way people in the border area deferred to him in a way he had not described but she had heard between the lines of his explanation. The boundary he had called a responsibility. The way he moved through the Ashwood as if he owned it, not the arrogance of ownership but something quieter and more total. The familiarity of someone who was here because they had a right to be everywhere. She thought about the ribbon of deference she had not been able to name when she first saw how he carried himself. She thought about the note in the small book she had caught a half glimpse of once, where the top line had read, and she had looked away immediately and never mentioned it. The letters that had spelled territory in formal hand. "You have been here for weeks," she said. "Yes. Alone. Yes." The Alpha King, she said, was alone in the Ashwood for weeks. I needed to think about something, he said. It was what he had told her before. She heard it differently now. You came out here by yourself to think, she said. It is easier to think when no one knows where you are, he said. Being the Alpha King means there is almost never a moment when someone does not know where you are. She looked at him with a concentration that came from trying to assemble many things very quickly. And when the boundary matter brought you near neutral territory, that boundary is one of many that fall under my jurisdiction, he said. Yes. And when you followed my tracks, she said. I told you why, he said. That part was exactly what I said it was. She believed him. She recognized the specific texture of truth in how he said it, and she had spent enough years listening to people to know the difference. She stood up from the table and walked to the window and looked at the snow-covered clearing and the dark line of trees beyond it. Her hands were at her sides. She could feel her heart moving at a speed that was not quite alarm, and not quite anything else she had a clean word for. The Alpha King had found her in the woods. The Alpha King had given her his bed and his coat, and mended her dress, and told her she had done the right thing, and sat with her by the fire every evening for 8 days, while she rebuilt herself out of whatever Caden Vale's rejection had left over. The Alpha King, who governed every pack on this continent, who held the authority that made alphas like Caden Vale into subordinates, who could end a territorial dispute or recognize a bond, or dissolve a pack with the weight of his word. This man had sat across from her at a small table, and drunk tea she had made for him, and told her she was thinking too loudly, and taught her the way of the forest and looked at her, on more than one occasion, with an expression she had never quite found the name for. She turned around. Why did you not tell me? She said. Because you needed someone to be nothing more than a person with a fire, he said, and I needed to be that for a while. She looked at him for a long time. Is that true? She said. Or is it the kindest version of the truth? Both, he said. They are not in conflict. She walked back to the table. She did not sit down. She stood with her hand on the back of the chair and looked at him directly. And he looked back at her with that steady, unflinching attention that she now understood was not a personal quality. Or not only a personal quality, but also the attribute of someone who had spent years doing a job that required him to look clearly at things other people looked away from. The Alpha King has no mate, she said. It was not quite a question. No, he said. Not for 12 years, she said. She had known this the way pack members know large facts about the person who governs them, not from personal knowledge but from the kind of ambient information that exists in pack territories the way weather exists, always present, rarely examined. 13, he said quietly. She looked at him. His name was Declan, he said, and his voice was perfectly level, and she understood from the levelness of it, from the specific quality of stillness a person achieves only by long practice, what that meant, and what it had cost, and why a man who could choose to be anywhere had chosen to be alone in Old Woodland for weeks in November. I am sorry, she said. It was a long time ago, he said. She sat down, not because she needed to, but because standing felt like it required too much attention she wanted to put somewhere else. You said you experienced it once, she said. What I was feeling with my wolf, the quiet. Yes, he said. That was when. Yes. She looked at the table, the 2 cups between them, the fire visible past his shoulder, the clean, ordinary warmth of it. KL, she said. He looked at her. What were you thinking about? She said. Out here. The thing that was easier to think about with fewer people around. His hands were flat on the table, still. The hands of someone who had made a decision about whether to fidget many years ago and had not reversed it. The old territory maps, he said. And what they tell me about the future. He paused. And whether I am willing to let the future be what the maps say it should be. She did not fully understand this. She suspected she was not meant to fully understand it yet. She let it rest between them. I was going to leave today, she said. I know, he said. I am not sure I want to anymore, she said, and I am very aware that yesterday I could not have said whether that was about you or about not being ready to walk 11 miles in the cold, and today the math is different because I know who you are. The math is not different, he said. Who I am does not change what has happened here. She looked at him. Doesn't it? No, he said. It adds information. It does not change the thing that has been here. She pressed her fingertips together under the table where he could not see them. She was thinking about her wolf, which was sitting up straight inside her and paying extremely close attention to everything, and about the thread she had felt and the thread she had lost, and about the difference between a thread and a rope, and about whether she had the capacity to trust this kind of weight again, so soon after being dropped. "I need time," she said. "I know," he said. "More than 8 days." "I know that too." She looked up at him. "You do not seem surprised." "I am not," he said. "I would be concerned if you were not cautious. A person who stops being cautious after a single week in the woods is not someone I would trust." She almost smiled. "That is a strange thing for someone in your position to want, someone who does not defer." "It is not strange at all," he said. "It is exactly what someone in my position needs and almost never gets." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I am not going to the settlement today." "All right," he said. "I am going to stay for a while longer," she said. "Not because I have decided anything, because I have not decided anything, and I want to do that honestly instead of running toward the first exit." He nodded. "And you are going to tell me the truth about things," she said. "All the things, not when you think I am ready, but when I ask." He looked at her steadily. "That I can agree to." "Good," she said. She picked up her cup, drank the last of the cold tea. Her wolf was fully upright now, more awake than she had been since before the ceremony, and the feeling of it, of herself being present in herself, was so unfamiliar after weeks of absence, that she had to sit with it for a moment and simply recognize it. She was here. She was in one piece. She was making choices instead of waiting for them to be made for her. The Alpha King was watching her from across a small table in a cabin in the Ashwood, and his expression was the most careful thing she had ever seen a face try to hold, and she understood that he was not waiting for her to decide about him. He was waiting for her to decide about herself. That was the difference. That was everything. Outside, a bird landed on the snow-heavy branch above the window and then lifted away again, and the branch released its white load in a cascade that fell without sound, and the morning continued its cold and very clear work, and nothing that needed to be said was left unsaid. They sat with the fire between them, and the truth on the table, and everything that came next still ahead, and for the first time since she had walked out of that ceremony clearing, Ilara was not running toward something or away from something. She was exactly where she was. It was enough. She asked him that afternoon to show her the maps. He was quiet for a moment, the considering kind of quiet, and then he went to the storage structure and came back with the wooden box she had seen without opening. He set it on the table and lifted the lid, and she looked at what was inside. There were 6 documents, each folded with the care of someone who understood that paper could outlast everything built on it. 3 Boerpack seals from regions she recognized: Northern Ridge, the Southern Territories, the Eastern Range. 2 bore a seal she did not recognize, a circle with a line through its center that did not match any territorial symbol in the pack records she had worked with. The 6th was not sealed at all. It was older than the others, the paper a different weight and color, the kind that has aged without degrading because someone has kept it very carefully for a very long time. When Kale unfolded it on the table, she saw it was a map, hand-drawn, detailed, covering an area she recognized as this region, but in a configuration different from any current territory map she had seen. "This is older than the packs," she said. "By roughly 3 centuries," he said. She leaned over it. The old map divided the land differently from the current divisions. Fewer lines, larger sections, the borders following geographic features rather than the political negotiations of living beings. In the center of the map, where the Ashwood sat on current maps, was a section marked differently from the others, the lines of its border heavier, the interior marked with a symbol she had to look at twice before she recognized it. She had seen that symbol before. She had seen it every day of her life. The realization arrived slowly, the way very large things arrive, not all at once, but in stages, each one shifting the picture further until the final shape was undeniable. She straightened up. Her hands went to her left wrist, to the cloth she had worn there since childhood, but she changed the way most people change a bandage, habitually, without examining what was underneath. "Kale," she said. "Yes," he said. He was watching her. She unwrapped the cloth slowly. The mark on her inner wrist was not large, about the size of a coin, dark against her pale skin, a shape she had always described as a birthmark when asked, and a blemish when not. She had been told by the woman who raised her after her parents died that it was just a mark, nothing interesting, nothing to show people. She had believed this. She had wrapped it and covered it and not thought much about it. She held her wrist next to the map. The symbol in the center of the old territory, the marking that set it apart from every other section, was identical to the mark on her skin. She could hear her own breathing. "How long have you known?" she said. "Since the second morning," he said. "You washed your wrist at the stream and the cloth had slipped." She looked at him. "You have known for 6 days." "Yes." And you did not say anything? No, he said. She could feel her pulse in her wrist, over the mark. She controlled her voice very carefully. Why not? He met her eyes. Because you came into the Ashwood because you needed to. And what I knew about the mark was too large to put on top of what you were already carrying. He paused. And because I needed to be certain of what I was seeing before I said anything that could not be unsaid. She looked at the map, at the mark on her wrist, at the two of them, side by side, telling a story she did not yet have all the language for. Tell me, she said, what does it mean? He sat down. The old territory in the center of this map, he said, belonged to a bloodline that has not been active for 3 centuries, a lineage that predated the current pack system. When the modern territorial agreements were drawn, this bloodline was supposed to have ended. He looked at the map. It did not end. She was very still. The Ashwood sits on what was their land, he said, and every wolf of that blood is marked at birth. Not visibly. The mark comes in over time, usually between the ages of 10 and 15, small enough to dismiss. He looked at her wrist, distinctive enough to recognize, if you know what you are looking at. She thought about the woman who had raised her after her parents died, a distant relative, kind but remote, who had wrapped the mark without explaining it, and died herself when Elara was 18. She thought about her parents, whom she barely remembered, who had died when she was 12 of a fever that had taken them both within a week of each other, which was the kind of coincidence that ceased to be coincidence once you had enough information to put around it. My parents, she said. Cale was quiet. Was it a fever? She said. He looked at her with the kind of careful, specific truth in his eyes that told her the answer before he said it. There are records from that time, he said, in the old court archives, of certain interventions in bloodline territories. I have been working through those records for 2 years. He paused. I have not yet found your parents specifically, but the timeline and the geography are consistent with what the records describe. Her hands were flat on the table. She looked at the map. 3 centuries of something buried, a mark on a wrist she had covered her whole life, a rejection that had sent her into the woods that sat on the land of her own bloodline. She was not breathing quite properly. Someone knew, she said, Caden, or the people around Caden. They knew what I was. It is possible, he said carefully. I do not want to tell you certainties I do not yet have, but yes, it is possible that your placement in the Harrow Pack was not random, and that what happened at the ceremony was not only about a man's choice. She pressed her palm flat over the mark on her wrist, not covering it, just holding it. Who wanted the bloodline hidden? She said. That, he said, is what I came to the Ashwood to think about. She looked up at him. He held her gaze steadily. Because the answer to that question is going to change a great many things, he said, and I needed to understand what I was willing to do about it before I had to act. She sat with this for a long moment. The fire, the map, the mark on her wrist. The man across the table who was the most powerful wolf alive and who had spent weeks alone in old woodland thinking about what he was willing to do, and who had found her here, in the center of the land that belonged to her blood, as if something older than either of them had arranged it. And now, she said, have you decided what you are willing to do? He looked at her without hesitation. Yes, he said. She nodded. She did not ask what. Not yet. She was still learning the shape of this, still finding the edges of it, still understanding what it meant to be a woman who had spent 26 years being made small, who had covered the mark of her own history under a strip of cloth, because she had been told it was nothing. It was not nothing. She knew that now. She was going to have to learn what it was, slowly, with Cale's help and the maps and whatever was in those archives and whatever came after this quiet morning in the Ashwood. But she knew, with the particular certainty that comes not from evidence but from recognition, that everything that had happened to her had been pointed at this. She was here, on her blood's land, with the only man alive who had gone looking for the truth she was carrying. She breathed out. Show me the rest of the documents, she said. He did. The documents took 3 days to properly understand. Not because they were complicated in their language. The formal pack records of 3 centuries ago were dense but readable, written in the same legal shorthand that Elara had learned to parse during her infirmary years, when she had to work through old medical designations and administrative classifications. The difficulty was not comprehension. The difficulty was what they said when understood. She and Cale worked through them on the table with 2 candles between them when the afternoon light failed. Elara reading, and Cale providing the context she lacked, the names of the governing bodies, the political climate of the period, the specific mechanisms by which the old territorial system had been dismantled, and the current pack order had been assembled in its place. What emerged from the documents piece by piece was not a simple story. 300 years ago, the old bloodline, her bloodline, the name in the documents was Vael, which was not a name she had ever heard, which told her how thoroughly the removal had been, had held a central position in the land's governance, not through force, not through political dominance, but through something the records described with the dry precision of administrative language as interpretive authority, the right to read the old maps, the right to confirm or deny territorial claims, the right to mediate between packs and disputes that could not be resolved by the ordinary mechanisms. It was the kind of authority that accumulated over generations and became, eventually, the kind that made powerful people nervous. The restructuring of the territorial system in the 3rd century, Cale said, tracing a line in one of the documents with his finger, is presented in the official records as a voluntary reorganization, an agreement between the major packs to create a more stable and equitable system. But it wasn't, she said. The records in the private archives of the court tell a different story, he said. The Vael bloodline was removed from the governance structure before the restructuring. The removal is documented. The reason given is, he found the line, that the bloodline had become a point of contention between competing territorial interests. Which means, she said, which means several large packs wanted the land and did not want the existing authority to have any claim over how it was divided, he said. She looked at the map, the heavy border, the symbol in the center. The Ashwood, she said. The Ashwood sits on what was the Vael seat, he said, the Central Territory. The records describe it as the land that could not be claimed by any single pack because of its position, geographically and in terms of the old governance structure. When the bloodline was removed from authority, no one could agree on how to allocate it. So it became nobody's land, she said. For 300 years, he said. She sat back. And the bloodline, she said. The removal. He was quiet for a moment. The records describe a dispersal. Pack members of Vael heritage were distributed across the new pack territories. They were told this was for stability. The mark was described in the new administrative records as a hereditary condition, nothing more. Over generations, people believed it. My parents knew, she said, or they found out. Your parents came from a region of the Eastern Range where there was a small community of Vael descent, he said. I found this 3 weeks ago, which is partly why I came out here. The community was recorded in a census, 40 years ago, as numbering 63 people. He paused. 20 years ago, the census records show 6. The number sat in the room. 57 people, she said. In 20 years, he said. She pressed both hands flat on the table. She could feel the texture of the wood under her palms. Real, solid, present. She needed something solid. My parents died when I was 12, she said, of a fever. I know, he said. He did not add anything to this, because there was nothing to add that would make it better, and he was a person who understood when more words were the wrong choice. She breathed through it, through the specific cold of understanding something she had always half understood, and had chosen not to look at directly. Her parents had not simply died of a fever. The fever had not simply happened. The 6 people left in a community of 63 after 20 years did not simply represent bad luck. Who, she said. That is the question I do not yet have a complete answer to, he said. 3 centuries of records, multiple governing bodies, interests that have shifted and reorganized over generations. What I can tell you is that the motivation is consistent across time. The Vael bloodline represents an authority that the current territorial structure was built specifically to eliminate. Anyone who holds that mark holds a potential claim to a kind of governance the current alphas do not want reinstated. She looked at him. Including you. I am the Alpha King, he said. I hold authority under the current system. The Vael claim is from before that system. They are not necessarily in conflict, but, he paused carefully, there are those who would not wait to find out. Caden Vael, she said, the Harrow Pack, the Eastern Range, the Hale family, who Caden bonded with, are one of the oldest Eastern Range families, he said. They were present at the original restructuring. Their name is in 3 of these documents. She looked at the documents. She had read them. She had seen the name. She had not made the connection until now. Petra Hale, the woman Caden had chosen. The woman who had stepped forward in the ceremony clearing while Alara stood in the back row and understood, in real time, what 2 years of her life had been for. He knew, she said. He did not accidentally choose someone else. He was placed beside me to watch me. Cale did not answer immediately. I believe so, he said. Though I want to be precise, I believe he was placed beside you, and I believe the Hale family was aware of your heritage. And I believe the bond he eventually recognized with Petra Hale served multiple purposes. Whether he understood all of it or was used by those who did, he shook his head. I cannot tell you that yet. She thought about the 2 years, about the careful way she had made herself small, about the filing and the infirmary shifts and the late evenings in the pack records room, about all the small ways she had been useful in a pack that had kept her precisely because useful people with no notable claims are easy to control and easy to watch. The mate bond thread she had felt and lost. The quiet of her wolf during those years, not injured but suppressed. By what? By proximity to people who knew what she was and needed her not to know it. Was that even possible? She did not know enough yet. She would need to know more. I need to go to the Eastern Range, she said. Cale looked at her carefully. Yes, he said. Eventually. Not eventually, she said. Soon. The people who have been removing your bloodline for 3 centuries are not people you walk toward unprepared, he said, and his voice was even, but the firmness in it was very real. I am not suggesting I walk in alone, she said. I am telling you that I am not going to sit in this cabin with a new piece of information every day until I am completely informed before taking a single step. I spent 2 years being patient and being watched. I am done being patient. He looked at her. She looked back. I am not asking for your permission, she said. I know you are not, he said. Then what is the expression on your face? She said. Something shifted in his features, not quite the smile from before, but close. It is not concern, he said. It is recalibration. She waited. I have spent 13 years as Alpha King, he said. In that time, I have had approximately 4 conversations where the person I was speaking to was not, at some level, managing how I was receiving what they said. He looked at the maps. You do not manage. She thought about this. Is that useful or inconvenient? Both, he said. Constantly. She almost smiled. She did not quite let it all the way through. We need to talk about Nora, she said. Cale looked at her. Your neighbor. The woman who warned you before the ceremony. She knew. Elara said. Not everything. I don't think she knew what I was or about any of this. But she knew the ceremony was going to go the way it went. And she tried to make it easier for me. And she is still back there in the Harrow territory. She paused. If someone connects her to me, she is not safe. He was quiet for a moment. You want to get word to her. I want to know she is all right, Elara said. And if she is not, I want her somewhere she is. He nodded slowly. I have contacts at the neutral territory boundary. I can send a message that does not point back to either of us. How long would that take? 3 days, maybe 4. He looked at her steadily. In return, you wait those 4 days before you decide which direction to walk in. She considered this. 3 days, she said. 4. 3.5. The corners of his mouth moved. You are negotiating with the Alpha King about 3 hours. I am negotiating with a person I have known for 10 days about 3 hours, she said. The title has nothing to do with it. He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Something in his face did the careful containing thing she had learned to recognize. Something present and held and not yet given its moment. 3.5 days, he said. She nodded. She looked at the map on the table. The old border, the heavy line, the symbol in the center of it. Her blood's land, her blood's mark on her wrist, uncovered now, no cloth over it, breathing air for the first time in years. She had come into the Ashwood to escape something. She was beginning to understand that she had come home to something instead. I need to know, she said, if there is anyone left, from the old community. 63 people, 20 years ago, and then 6. I do not know who the 6 were, he said, but the records I have access to might tell us. Then we look, she said. Yes, he said, we look. She had not said we before. She noticed him notice it. She did not take it back. Outside, the Ashwood moved in a light wind coming up from the south, and the snow on the branches shifted and fell in small clouds, and the trees that belonged to her blood stood tall and dark and patient the way they had for 300 years, and were very likely to go on standing long after the people who had tried to erase what grew from this ground were themselves forgotten. She put the mark on her wrist back in the light. She did not wrap it again. The message went out the following morning. Cale wrote it himself, brief, uninformative to anyone who intercepted it, but specific enough that the right person would understand its purpose. He sent it through a contact at the neutral territory boundary, a woman who ran a small supply post and who had, Elara gathered from the way Cale spoke about her, been useful to him before in situations that required discretion. Does she know who you are? Elara asked. She knows I am someone who pays promptly and keeps my word, Cale said. That is generally sufficient. Elara thought about a life in which that was your primary introduction to the people you trusted, and found it deeply unsurprising. She spent the 3.5 days doing two things. The first was reading every document in the box, twice through, and then the notes Cale had compiled in his small book, which he handed to her without ceremony, on the second day when she asked for them. She read them with the careful, systematic attention she gave to complex medical cases, building the full picture before drawing any conclusions, noting what was confirmed and what was inferred and what was simply unknown. The second thing she did was think about her wolf. She had been doing this since the revelation about the mark, a slow, private inventory of the past several years of her life, now reviewed through new information, the mate bond pull she had felt toward Caden, the way her wolf had gone quiet during the 2 years in the Harrow Pack, the way she had felt for most of her adult life, like someone operating at partial capacity, without quite being able to identify the source of the reduction. She thought about the pack records she had worked through in the Harrow Infirmary. She had always been assigned to the administrative records, the census work, the old documents nobody else wanted to spend time with. She had thought this was because of her skills. She was beginning to think it might have been because those records contained information about certain bloodlines, and somebody had wanted her close enough to monitor, without being close enough to understand. She had spent 2 years filing the evidence of her own history. On the third morning she was sitting outside in a rare patch of pale sunlight, working through the notes, when she heard something that made her go still. It was distant, 1/2 mile, perhaps more, but distinct. Footsteps in the snow, moving through the ashwood with the specific, deliberate quiet of something that was trying very hard not to be heard. Not an animal, not the random movement of the forest, something intentional. She was inside, and had her hand on Cale's arm before she had formed a complete thought. He was already standing. "How many?" he said. "At least 2, she said. "Moving east of us, trying to be quiet." He was at the window, looking through the gap in the shutter, completely still. She could feel the change in him, not alarm, not the anxious readiness of someone surprised, but something more deliberate, a man who had been aware of the possibility of this arriving and had already decided what he was going to do when it did. "They are not moving toward us," he said. "They are moving past us toward the creek." "Could be travelers," she said. "No," he said. "No traveler moves that way through this territory." She had reached the same conclusion before he said it. "They are looking for something," he said, "or someone." She thought about the ceremony, about 11 days having passed since she had crossed the boundary into neutral territory, about the message sent through the supply post, brief and careful, but still, any message was a thread that could potentially be followed. "Can you tell who they are?" she said. He shook his head. "Not from here." He looked at her. "I am going to go around to their east side. I want to see them before they see us." "I am coming," she said. He looked at her with the look that was not quite argument but occupied the space beside it. "I am faster than I look," she said, "and I am not staying here alone while you go out into the trees toward 2 people we cannot identify." A pause. He nodded. They went out the back of the cabin, keeping the structure between them and the direction of the sound. The cold hit her immediately, sharp and clean, air that had not been warmed by anything. The snow was deep enough to make silence difficult, but she had learned in 11 days how to move in this forest, where the ground was soft and where it was not, and she followed Cale's path exactly, stepping where he stepped. He moved through the ashwood the way she had noticed from the first day, without hesitation, without the small checks and recalibrations of someone navigating on incomplete information. He moved like someone who knew exactly where the trees were. They circled east, wide, taking 15 minutes to cover what would have been 3 minutes in a direct line. When Cale slowed and lowered himself behind a wide trunk, she followed and looked through the gap between 2 roots. 2 men. One she did not recognize, broad dark coat, moving through the snow with a heavy methodical tread. The second made the air leave her body. Owen Marsh, who had been her friend for 4 years, who had worked beside her in the Harrow Infirmary, who had been one of perhaps 6 people in the pack she had considered genuinely close to her, who had left a bowl of soup on her doorstep once when she had been too ill to cook, who had laughed at her jokes, who had stood at the back of the ceremony with her and, she thought, she believed, she had decided it was true, had been genuinely surprised by what had happened. She had told herself that. She had needed it to be true. His face now, moving through the ashwood with the focused, careful attention of someone searching for a specific thing, told her something she had been wrong to believe. She felt the ground under her hands, cold and real and present, and she breathed through what that look on Owen's face meant, and she did not make a sound. Cale, beside her, did not move. He did not look at her. He was watching the two men with the quiet, total focus of someone for whom this confirmed something he had already suspected. The two men passed. They were looking at the ground, tracks in the snow, and they followed the line of the creek north, which was away from the cabin, which was likely because she and Cale had been careful for the past several days about where they walked and what marks they left. The snow that had fallen 3 days ago had covered the earlier evidence of the cabin's use. From this angle, from this distance, with the snow fresh, there was nothing to point directly to where they were. The men moved north along the creek and then disappeared around a bend in the tree line. She and Cale waited. The forest was absolutely still around them. He touched her arm, one brief, deliberate contact, and she looked at him. He nodded back toward the cabin. She nodded. They went back the way they had come, silent, careful, and it was not until they were inside with the door closed and Cale had checked the window that she let herself breathe properly. "You know him," Cale said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. She told him about Owen, about 4 years, about soup on her doorstep and jokes and the particular grief of understanding that a friend was not what you had believed him to be, not quite a betrayal, because she was not sure he had understood what he was part of, but not the thing she had held him as either. Cale listened without interrupting. "He may not know the full picture," she said, when she was done. "He may have simply been asked to report on me for reasons he was not given." "That is possible," Cale said. "But he is here," she said. "He came here." "Yes," Cale said. She sat down at the table. The documents were spread out where she had left them, the map with its heavy border, the mark on her wrist. "They are going to come back," she said. "When they don't find tracks north of here, they will work backward." "Yes," he said. "We need to move." She had expected that. She had been expecting it since the moment she recognized Owen's face. "Where?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "I have a place," he said. "Farther into the old territory, south of here, near the center of what the map marks." He paused. "Where no one who is not specifically looking will find us, and where what you need to understand about the Vale land will be easier to show you than to describe." She looked at the map, at the center of the old territory. "Show me where on the map," she said. He pointed. She looked at the location, the heart of the Ashwood, the place the old border enclosed most tightly, the place the symbol was drawn most clearly. "All right," she said. "We leave in an hour," he said. "Pack only what you cannot leave behind." She looked around the cabin. She had arrived with nothing. She had accumulated, in 11 days, a coat that was not hers, a small collection of borrowed knowledge, and the beginning of an understanding of what she was. She took the coat off the hook. She put it on. She was ready to go. They moved south through the Ashwood, at a pace that was fast without being hurried, the pace of people who needed to cover ground and understood that panic was a speed that cost more than it gained. Cale led. He carried the documents in the inside pocket of his coat, and the wooden box was left behind, which told her something about his assessment of the situation. He had taken the irreplaceable things and left the container, which was the decision of someone who had done this kind of leaving before. She carried nothing except the coat on her back and the information in her head and the mark on her wrist, which she kept looking at without meaning to, as if she needed to confirm it was still there. They did not speak for the first hour. The Ashwood changed as they moved deeper into it. The trees became older and larger, and the spaces between them grew more complex. Root systems that rose and fell like buried architecture. Fallen trunks that were old enough to have become part of the landscape rather than disruptions to it. The snow was thinner here under the heavy canopy, the branches above too dense for much to have reached the ground. Their footsteps were quieter. She had been watching the trees without knowing why, until Cale stopped at the edge of a wide clearing and she looked across it and understood. The clearing was not natural. She had been in enough old forest to know what natural clearings looked like, irregular, shaped by what grew and what fell, bounded by whatever happened to die or open up. This one was circular. The trees that ringed it were all roughly the same size, the same species, spaced with an evenness that could only have come from planting. In the center of the clearing, the ground was raised slightly, a gentle elevation that was too consistent to be geological, the kind of shape a structure makes when it has been gone for centuries, and the earth has had time to settle over it. "This is where it stood," she said. "Yes," Cale said. She walked out into the clearing. The snow here was undisturbed. No tracks, no marks. The wind that moved through the surrounding forest stilled at the clearing's edge, and the air inside it was different, not warmer, but stiller, the kind of stillness that felt like an absence of something, rather than simply a lack of motion. She walked to the center, to the raised ground. She stood on it. Her wolf, awake and alert since the morning the documents had been spread on the table, did something she did not have a word for. Not a surge, not exactly. More like a recognition, the way a body recognizes its native language in a stream of foreign sound, not consciously, but before consciousness, at the level where certain things simply register as known. She was standing on the ground that belonged to her blood, not in a legal or political sense. In the older sense, in the sense that had existed before there were laws or politics, when the connection between a bloodline and a territory was the same kind of connection as the one between a river and its bed. She could feel it through her boots, through the soles of her feet, a deep, slow, underground thing that was not warmth and was not energy, but was something she had no name for, because she had never stood in her own land before. "Say something," Cale said quietly, from the edge of the clearing. She turned. He had not walked out onto the clearing's ground. He was standing at its border, watching her with an expression she could see from here, careful and steady, and containing something she had not given him the moment to release yet. "I don't have words for it," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at the circle of ancient trees, at the sky above, pale and cold and far, at the ground under her feet, raised slightly by 3 centuries of settled stone and memory. She thought about 63 people, about 6. About a wrist wrapped in cloth and a childhood in which nothing was explained and a life in which she had made herself small to survive in a world that was going to smaller her anyway, because the smallness had been the plan all along. She thought about Owen's face, moving through the snow. She thought about Caden at the ceremony, looking at Petra Hale, and the way the look had contained everything she had needed to understand about why the past 2 years had been organized the way they were. She thought about her mother's hands, which she could barely remember, and about a woman who had wrapped her daughter's wrist and said it was nothing, and had died before she could explain what it was and what it had cost her to keep it hidden. She stood in the center of her blood's land and breathed. "Someone needs to know I am here," she said. Cale, at the edge of the clearing, was very still. "The people who are looking for me," she said. "They are looking for a woman who ran away. A rejected she-wolf with no notable standing and no particular claim. They are not looking for someone who came home." She turned to face him. "I want to change what they are looking for." He looked at her carefully. "That means stepping out of the shadow." "Yes," she said. "It means making yourself visible to people who have been removing your bloodline for 3 centuries, he said. "Yes," she said. "It means accepting what the mark means in terms of the old governance structures, and what that implies, and what it will require of you." "Cale," she said. He stopped. "I am not asking for the full list of consequences," she said. "I am telling you I understand the direction of them, and I am choosing the direction anyway." He looked at her for a long moment. "What do you need?" he said. She had not expected the simplicity of that question. She stood with it for a moment, the clean directness of a man who had decided to be on her side, and was asking what that meant in practical terms. "I need to find whoever is left from the old community," she said. "You told me 6 people were recorded 20 years ago. I need to know if any of them are still living." "I can look into that," he said. "My court archives are more complete than the documents I have with me. I need to understand what the mark means legally," she said. "Not in terms of the old bloodline ceremonial claim, but in terms of what the current system does or does not recognize. I have people who can research that," he said. "And I need Nora to be somewhere safe before anything else moves," she said. He nodded. "I sent the message 3 days ago. We should have a response within the next 2 days." She walked back to the edge of the clearing. She stopped just inside its boundary, at the line where the planted trees began, and looked at him from this side of it. "Come in," she said. He looked at her. "The ground," she said. "Come stand on it." He looked at the clearing for a moment with the expression that meant he was weighing something, not against her, but in himself. Then he walked in. He came to stand beside her. They were close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him in the cold air, and neither of them moved away from it. She did not say anything about the thing between them. She was done mismanaging it by pretending it was less than it was, but she was also done with the kind of forward motion that did not account for what the ground beneath her feet was going to require of her in the coming weeks. "When we go back to the court," she said, "what happens?" He looked at the raised center of the clearing. "That depends on what you want to happen." "I want the people who have been removing my bloodline to stop," she said. "I want to know who they are." "Both of those things will happen," he said. "I will make sure of it." She looked at him. "As Alpha King. As someone who has been working on this for 2 years," he said. "The title is the mechanism. But the intention was there before I found the records. She thought about this. Why? Why spend 2 years on the records of a bloodline that most people think ended 3 centuries ago? He was quiet for a moment. Because the old governance system had something the current one does not, he said. And I have spent 13 years watching the absence of it cause problems I cannot solve with the authority I hold. He looked at her. The old system had someone whose job was not to hold territory or command wolves but to interpret, to stand between competing claims and find what was fair. That function does not exist in the current structure. And you thought if the bloodline was still alive somewhere. I thought if the bloodline was still alive, the function might be able to be restored, he said. Yes. She looked at her wrist. You are not looking for a person, she said. You were looking for a function. I was looking for the people who carried it, he said. They are not separate from each other. She thought about the 2 years in the Harrow Pack, about the administrative records and the census work and the old documents. She had spent 2 years being good at exactly the thing that was apparently encoded in her blood, finding the line between competing claims, reading the old record, understanding the pattern that everyone else was too close to see. She had done it for a pack that was watching her. She was going to do it for something much larger. This is going to be very complicated, she said. Yes, he said. I have no formal training for any of it. You have 26 years of being the person who understood what was happening in a room before anyone told her, he said. That is not nothing. She looked at him sideways. Was that a compliment? It was an assessment, he said. I rarely give one without the other. She almost smiled. She let it a little further through this time. We need to get out of this clearing before Owen and whoever he is with doubles back south, she said. Yes, he said. There is a structure about 2 miles from here. Old. It has not been used in many years, but it is still sound. How do you know? I came here 3 weeks ago, he said. I looked at the whole territory. She turned to look at him properly. You came here 3 weeks ago and walked the old Vale territory. Yes, he said. Before you found me. Yes. And then you found me in it. He held her gaze. Yes. She looked at the clearing one more time, at the ancient planted trees, at the raised ground in the center where the old structure had stood and the earth had settled over it and covered it and kept it. Nothing buried stays buried. Not forever. Not if someone keeps looking. All right, she said. Show me the structure. He turned south. She followed. The ashwood moved around them as they went, old and dark and immovably patient, the way things are patient when they have been waiting for a specific thing long enough that waiting has become their natural state, and the arrival of what they have been waiting for is not a surprise but a settling, a finally, a here, a thing coming home to the place it was always going to arrive at, by whatever road it took to get there. She kept her wrist uncovered. She did not intend to cover it again. The structure Cale had described turned out to be more than she expected. It was built into the side of a low hill, set back between 2 of the largest trees she had seen in the ashwood, older than the planted ring around the clearing, thick enough at the base that she could have stood inside one of them if it had been hollow. The building was stone, unlike the wood and stone cabin, and the stone was the same dark gray that ran through the roots and outcroppings in this part of the forest, which told her it had been quarried from the immediate area. Someone had built here using what the land provided. Someone who planned to stay. The door was low and narrow and heavy, thick planks bound with iron that had gone dark with age but held. Cale put his shoulder against it and it moved, slow and resistant and protesting, but it moved. Inside was a single large room with a fireplace at the far end large enough to stand in, stone all around. The cold deep and settled but dry. The ceiling was high enough. There were 2 wooden benches against one wall, and a wide shelf running the length of the room at shoulder height, old carved into the stone itself rather than attached to it, the kind of thing that does not come loose in 300 years. She looked up. On the far wall, above the fireplace, someone had carved something into the stone. Not graffiti, not casual marks. A deliberate carving, shaped with skill. The lines deep and clear despite the centuries. The symbol of the Vale bloodline. The same one on the old map. The same one on her wrist. At the center, surrounded by a pattern she did not know but recognized in the way you recognize the grammar of a language before you understand its words. This had been important to the people who built it. She stood in the cold of the old room and looked at the carving for a long time. Cale brought in wood from the external pile, covered, she noted, suggesting he had made provision on his earlier visit, and built a fire without asking if she wanted one. She watched him do it with the specific attention she had been giving everything he did since the morning she had learned who he was, which was the same attention she had always given him but calibrated slightly differently now. The fire took hold. The room began to warm. She sat on one of the stone benches and looked at the carving above the fireplace. There were people here, she said, living people. This was not just a border marker or a ceremony space. No, Cale said. He was at the shelf, running his fingers along the back of it, feeling for something. This was a working space, a place of record and hearing. He found what he was looking for, a gap in the stone, a small hollow, and reached in and drew out something wrapped in old oilcloth. He carried it to the fireplace and unwrapped it carefully. It was a book, old, much older than the documents in the wooden box, the cover thick and dark and worn to a smoothness that meant many hands over many years. He opened it carefully, the way you open something that has been kept safe for a reason. She got up and stood beside him. The writing inside was in the same hand throughout, no, on closer inspection, in many hands, but in the same style, the same formal lettering that suggested training rather than individuality. Record entries, dates at the top of each section, names on each line, beneath each name a brief notation. "What is this?" she said. "A registry," he said, "of hearings held here. Disputes brought before the Vale Authority. What was said? What was decided?" She looked at the names. Some she recognized as place names that still existed in current Pact territories. Many she did not. The entries went back. She could not tell how far. The dates in a calendar system she was not immediately familiar with, but far. "This has been here for 300 years, she said. "Waiting," he said quietly. She turned pages carefully. Not many, just enough to feel the scope of it. Entry after entry, dispute after dispute, the careful record of a governance that had existed before the current system had been built over it. She stopped at a page near the middle of the book. The writing changed here, not the style. The style remained the same precise formal hand, but the quality of it, the pressure on the pen was different. The letters were formed with the same control, but the control was effortful rather than natural, as if the person writing was doing it while something else demanded their attention. At the top of the entry, the date. In the middle of the entry, 3 names she did not know. At the bottom of the entry, in the same careful formal hand, but with that quality of effort behind it, 1 sentence. She read it. She read it again. "Cale," she said. He looked at where her finger was on the page. He read it. The fire crackled. The warmth was reaching the corners of the room now, the cold pulling back from the stone. The sentence said, "The mark does not end with us. It continues until it is needed again, and when it returns it will find what we built here waiting." She straightened up. She was the last of a bloodline that had built this room and left this book and carved this symbol above the fireplace and wrapped the mark on their children's wrists and died, some of them, so that what they were could continue past their dying. They had built not for themselves but for the return of what they were. They had built knowing they would not see it but trusting that it would come. She pressed the back of her hand, the marked wrist, against her sternum. "They knew," she said. "Not who, not when, but they knew it would come back." "Yes," Cale said. She looked at him. He was watching her with the careful containing expression, and this time she did not let it stay contained. "Say what is in your face," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "I came here looking for a function," he said. "A bloodline. A historical claim with practical applications for a governance problem I have been unable to solve for 13 years. He paused. "I did not expect—" He stopped. "What?" she said. He held her gaze. "You," he said, specifically. She breathed. Outside, the wind moved through the ashwood, a long, unhurried sound, the breath of old trees in cold air. "I need more time," she said. "Not because I do not know what I feel, because what I feel is sitting inside everything else this is, and I need those to be separate from each other before I trust either of them." "I know," he said. "You keep saying that." "I keep meaning it," he said. She looked at the registry in his hands, at the carving above the fire, at the room built by people who had trusted that the future would arrive. "We are going to need more people than the 2 of us," she said, "for whatever comes next." "Yes," he said. "I know exactly who to contact." "And we are going to need to move carefully," she said. "The people who sent Owen into the ashwood are not going to stop." "No," he said. "They will not." "So we move first," she said, "before they find us here." "Tomorrow morning," he said. "The night is too far along and the weather has been uncertain. We stay tonight and leave with the light." She nodded. She sat back down on the bench and looked at the fire. He wrapped the registry carefully and placed it inside his coat. The warmth of the old room held them. The stone remembered its builders. Above the fire, the carved symbol looked out over everything the room had waited 3 centuries to witness. She kept her wrist uncovered. She kept her hands in her lap. She breathed. Tomorrow she was going to begin the business of becoming exactly what someone had spent 300 years trying to prevent. Tonight she sat in a room her blood had built, and the fire was warm, and the man beside her was the one person in the world who had been looking for her before he knew her face. And she let all of it, the fear and the grief and the weight and the something she still had not named, sit in the room with her without being resolved. Some things were not ready to be resolved. Some things needed to breathe for a while first. She was learning the difference. The response about Nora came at dawn. Cale had sent a second message from the old stone building, through a different channel than the first, a secondary contact whose name Alara did not know and did not ask for. The response arrived while she was still asleep, carried by a runner who left it at the agreed point without stopping. Cale had it in his hand when she opened her eyes. He gave it to her without preamble. It was 2 lines. The first, she left the Harrow territory 4 days ago of her own will. The second, she is currently at the border settlement. She is asking for you. Alara read it twice. She folded it and held it for a moment. She left on her own, she said. Yes, Cale said. Which means she knew something was coming, Alara said. Before we knew Owen was looking. Or she saw something after the ceremony that told her it was no longer safe to stay, Cale said. She thought about Nora, about 4 years of being neighbors, about the particular kind of person who leaves a bowl of soup on a doorstep without being asked. Nora was not a passive person. She was someone who noticed things and acted on them, quietly, without announcement. She had known about the ceremony. She had tried, in the only way available to her, to protect Alara from the worst of it. She had also known that Alara had disappeared into the ashwood and not come back. She is asking for me specifically, Alara said. By name, Cale confirmed. She knows something, Alara said. Cale looked at her steadily. That would be my assessment. She was already up. We need to go to the settlement. It is 11 miles from the edge of the ashwood, he said. We would also be in open territory. I know, she said. We go anyway. He did not argue. He began gathering the things they had. They left the stone building before the light was fully established, moving south and west through the ashwood toward the edge of the old territory. The morning was cold and clear, the sky a pale ice blue above the canopy, and their breath came out in steady clouds and the snow underfoot was firm from overnight freeze. They moved well. She had learned the rhythm of moving in this forest over 2 weeks, and she kept his pace without effort. She thought about what Nora might know. Nora had been in the Harrow Pack for 12 years. She had access to the pack records in a different way than Alara had, not through the administrative infirmary channels but through the domestic networks, through the kind of information that moves between people rather than being written down. She had known about the ceremony before it happened. She had tried, in her careful way, to prepare Alara for it. What else had she known that she had not said? They reached the edge of the ashwood by mid-morning. The transition from the old forest to the open land was abrupt. One step inside the canopy, the next in bare scrubby ground with the sky overhead sudden and enormous. Alara paused at the line for a moment, feeling the change. Outside the ashwood, she was a rejected she-wolf with no pack and no standing. Inside it, she had been something else, something that was still taking shape. She stepped out. They crossed the neutral territory on foot, moving at a consistent pace, not hurrying but not stopping. The land was flat here, the snow thinner than in the forest, the cold more honest in the open air. They passed the occasional frozen scrub and the marks of other travelers, but at a distance, moving in other directions, and no one approached. The border settlement appeared at the top of a low rise, a cluster of buildings around a central structure, the kind of modest working community that existed in the neutral zones and answered to no specific pack authority, which made them useful for exactly the kind of discretion people sometimes needed. The settlement had perhaps 80 residents. It had a supply post, a gathering house, several smaller buildings. It was not pretty, but it was solid, and the people they passed as they entered moved with the purposeful unhurry of people who had plenty to do and no time for drama. The supply post's proprietor, the woman Cale described as useful, who turned out to be a compact, practical woman of perhaps 50 named Frances, met them at the door with the expression of someone who had been expecting them. She is in the back room, Frances said, looking at Alara rather than Cale, which Alara found interesting. She has been there since yesterday. She will not speak to anyone except, Frances paused, except the person she came here looking for. She led them through the supply post to a room at the back, small, warm, smelling of coffee and wood smoke. Nora was sitting at a small table with her hands around a cup, and when the door opened she looked up and the expression that moved across her face was so complex that Alara needed a moment to separate out its parts: relief, guilt, something that had been held under pressure for a long time and was only now being allowed to release. Nora stood up. "I should have told you sooner," she said. "Sit down," Alara said. "Tell me now." They sat across from each other at the small table. Cale stood by the door, not in the room exactly, but present, and Nora looked at him briefly with the recognition of someone who had heard of him before she knew who he was and was now adjusting. "You know who he is," Alara said. "I know who he is now," Nora said. "I did not 2 weeks ago." She looked at Alara. "I looked at the records, after the ceremony, the ones in the administrative archive that you used to work on. You looked at the PAC records. The old ones," Nora said. "The census records from before your parents died. I had been looking for weeks before the ceremony, because something had been wrong for a long time, and I could not name what it was." "What had been wrong?" Alara said. Nora pressed her lips together. "Owen," she said. The name sat in the room. Alara felt it. "What about Owen?" she said carefully. "He started receiving visitors," Nora said. "Private ones. People I did not recognize, from outside the PAC, using the infirmary entrance after hours. I noticed because I live near the infirmary and I keep unusual hours." She paused. "I started noting the dates. 3 months before the ceremony, the visitors became more frequent. One of them, in the last week, I recognized. Not his name, but his family. He had the Hale features. He was from the Eastern Range." Alara looked at the table. "Owen told them when I was working late in the records room," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Nora said quietly. "I think so." She thought about the records room, about evenings she had worked past everyone else, going through old census documents that nobody had looked at in years, finding patterns she had not understood she was finding. Someone had always known when she was doing it. "You said you found something in the census records," Alara said. "After the ceremony." Nora reached into her coat and drew out a folded piece of paper, a copy, made hastily but carefully, of something. She slid it across the table. Alara unfolded it. It was a census entry from 26 years ago, a couple listed as residents of the Harrow PAC, transferred from the Eastern Range. Their names, which she recognized as her parents' names. Beneath the names, one child listed, age 1, and in the notation column beside the child's name, a classification code she had seen in the administrative records during her time in the infirmary room. She had filed documents with that code. She had never looked up what it meant. She showed it to Cale without speaking. He looked at it. "It is a surveillance classification," he said, "used in the current PAC system for individuals of hereditary interest." She looked at the code beside her name and the census entry. Her parents had been transferred to the Harrow PAC. Transferred, not relocated, not migrated, not arrived of their own decision. Placed, moved, like items on a shelf, reorganized into a location where they could be watched. And beneath their entry, their 1-year-old daughter, already classified. She had been surveilled since she was 1 year old. She had spent 25 years being useful in a PAC that was watching her, being patient for a man who was reporting on her, making herself small for people who needed her not to understand what she was. She set the paper down. She breathed. "When did you know?" she said to Nora. "Specifically, the exact moment." Nora looked at her with the specific pain of someone who has been carrying a delayed truth. 7 days before the ceremony," she said. "I found the classification code in an old directory and looked it up, and then I found your parents' entry." 7 days, Alara said. "Yes," Nora said. "And you did not tell me." Nora's hands were very still around her cup. "I did not know how," she said, "and I was afraid. Not for myself, for you. I thought if I told you and you left before the ceremony, it would—" She paused. "It would confirm to whoever was watching that you knew something, and I did not know what they would do." Alara looked at her. She understood this reasoning. She could not call it wrong. The choice between telling someone a truth that might endanger them and staying silent while they walked toward something painful was not a simple one, and she had never been someone who demanded simple choices from complicated situations. "You tried to warn me," Alara said. "Yes," Nora said. "I said what I could." "You said he was going to look at me and wonder what took him so long," Alara said. Nora looked at her. "That was not a prediction," Alara said. "That was a goodbye." Nora's eyes filled. She did not look away. "Yes," she said. Alara sat with this for a moment. The room was warm and small, and the three of them were very present in it. Outside, through the single window, the settlement went about its business, and the sky above was still that pale ice blue, and the world was doing what the world always does, which is continue, without particular regard for the adjustments being made inside its smallest rooms. "You left because Owen saw you looking at the records," Elara said. "He came to my door 2 days after the ceremony," Nora said. "He was asking about you. He wanted to know if I had heard from you, where you had gone. He was very," she searched for the word, careful about how he asked. "Friendly, concerned." She paused. "I have known Owen for 6 years. He was not being friendly. He was being what a friendly person sounds like. And you left the next day." "I left that night," Nora said. Elara looked at her across the small table. 4 years of being neighbors. 4 years of soup on doorsteps and early mornings, and the particular comfort of being known in the ordinary sense, the mundane sense, the way that has nothing to do with bloodlines or governance or historical claims and everything to do with sharing a fence line and borrowing flour when you have run out. "Come with us," she said. Nora looked at her. "Not because you are in danger here specifically," Elara said, "though you may be, because you know things and you chose to protect them, and I would rather have you where I can account for you than where I cannot." Nora looked at Cale. She looked back at Elara. "Where are you going?" she said. Elara glanced at Cale. "South," Cale said, "to the court, to begin doing what needs to be done properly, with the right tools and the right people." Nora looked at the folded paper on the table. At Elara's wrist, uncovered, the mark visible in the light of the room. "You know what you are," Nora said quietly. "Yes," Elara said. "How long have you known?" 8 days, Elara said. "Give or take." Nora looked at the mark. "I found a reference to it in the old records," she said. "A description. I did not know what it looked like. I did not know—" She stopped. "What?" Elara said. "I did not know you were the one carrying it," Nora said. "I knew someone in the pack was. I did not know it was you until the night I looked up the code." Elara nodded. "Come with us," she said again. Nora looked at her for a long moment. She picked up her cup, finished the last of whatever was in it. She set it down. "All right," she said. They left within the hour. Francis, at the door of the supply post, gave Elara a look as they went out that was not quite a message but contained one. The look of someone who had seen a great many things pass through her settlement and had learned not to volunteer commentary, but who understood the weight of what was moving through right now. Elara met the look. Francis nodded once. They went south, the three of them, into a morning that was cold and clear and getting clearer, and behind them, the Ashwood sat at the edge of the neutral land the way it had sat for 300 years, patient, dark, unchanged, holding everything it had been given to hold. She did not look back. She had stopped looking back. The journey south took 4 days. Cale had arrangements along the route, small stops, people who received them without surprise and offered what was needed without requiring explanation. Elara noted this not with suspicion, but with the clinical attention she brought to everything. It told her about the kind of operation he ran, the depth of its reach, the degree to which he had built support structures outside the formal authority of the court. A man who only held power through official channels was vulnerable every time those channels narrowed. A man who had also built the informal ones was something different. Nora adapted to travel with the quiet competence that Elara had always respected in her, efficient with what was available, unbothered by discomfort, present in the way of someone who has made a decision and is not revisiting it every hour. She and Cale found, over the 4 days, a functional working communication. She treated him with the careful directness of someone who understood the title, but was not going to let it change how she spoke, and he responded to this with the particular attentiveness he reserved for people who did not manage him. He told Elara on the second night that Nora reminded him of someone. She asked who. He said, "You, 3 days ago." She had looked at him for a moment and then gone back to her food because she did not know what to do with the precision of that answer. On the 3rd day they passed through territory she had not traveled before, packland to the east of neutral territory, belonging to a family called Weston whose alpha was a woman named Clara Weston, who greeted Cale with the specific formal respect of an alpha speaking to the king, and then looked at Elara with the even more specific look of someone who had been briefed. "She is real," Clara Weston said, not to Cale, to Elara directly. "Yes," Elara said. "I thought they were gone," Clara Weston said. "People keep being surprised by that," Elara said. Clara Weston looked at the mark on her wrist. Then she looked at her face, then she nodded, a single, deliberate nod. the kind that was not social acknowledgement, but something older and more specific. If you need the Western Territories, Clara Weston said, they are available. Elara held her gaze. Thank you, she said, I will remember that. She thought about it for the rest of that day's travel. The speed at which Clara Weston had made that offer, the sureness of it. The mark on her wrist had been visible, and the Alpha of the Western Territories had looked at it and offered her land. How many people know what the mark means? She asked Cale that evening. More than you might expect, he said. The old knowledge does not disappear entirely. It goes underground, but it stays. 63 people in a community 20 years ago, she said. Yes, he said. But the community was not the only carrier of the knowledge. Some of it lives in the pack traditions that were never fully overwritten. Some of it is in the old governance records that I have spent 2 years reading. He paused. And some of it lives in people like Clara Weston, who learned it from her grandmother, who learned it from hers. The Hale family, Elara said. The Eastern Range. They know what the mark means too. Yes, he said. That is why they were afraid of it. On the 4th day they came over a rise and she saw the court buildings in the valley below. Not a fortress, not the kind of heavy-walled thing she had imagined, but a complex of older stone structures clustered around a central hall, buildings that had been added to over centuries as the authority they represented had grown, the layers visible in the different stones and styles of each structure. She stopped at the top of the rise. It looks different from what I imagined, she said. What did you imagine? Cale said. Something more intimidating, she said. It is intimidating from the inside, he said. From the outside it is just old buildings. She looked at the valley, at the court, at the place she was about to walk into as, what, exactly? She was still assembling the language for it. Not as a petitioner, not as someone being brought for assessment, not even quite, as an ally, though that was closer. She was walking in as someone the court needed to reckon with, on her own terms, for the first time in its history. That was a large thing to walk toward. She walked toward it. The entrance to the court complex was not guarded in the obvious way she had expected. There were people present, steady, attentive people whose function was visible without being theatrical. But what struck her as she passed through the main gate was the quality of the attention she received. Not the attention given to a guest, not the attention given to a threat. The specific attention given to someone that the institutional memory of the place recognized, even if none of the current people in it had ever seen her kind before. She felt it in her spine, in her wolf, who was fully awake now and had been since the stone building in the Ashwood. They knew what she was. They did not know her. But they knew the mark. Cale's second-in-command was a lean, composed man named Henry Adler who met them in the main hall with 3 pages of written briefs, and the expression of someone who had been managing a very complicated situation for 2 weeks, and was genuinely relieved that the person responsible for most of the complications had finally returned. The Hale family has sent 3 formal inquiries to the court, Henry Adler said, without preamble, asking for information about an unaffiliated she-wolf last seen crossing into neutral territory from the Harrow Pack. What did you tell them? Cale said. That we had no current information on the individual in question, Henry Adler said, which was true as of each inquiry. He looked at Elara then, directly, with the focused attention of someone adding up facts. You are not what I was told to expect, he said. What were you told to expect? She said. Someone the records described, he said. I was thinking in terms of history. You are, he paused, selecting words with care, considerably more current than the records. Is that a problem? She said. No, he said. He said it with a certainty that surprised her. No, it is not. He walked them through to a room that was clearly a working space rather than a receiving room, maps on the walls, a table covered in documents, a fire at one end and 2 armchairs that had seen heavy use. He spread his hands over the table. What do you need? He said. Elara looked at the maps. She looked at the documents. She thought about the old registry in the stone building, and the carved symbol above the fireplace, and her parents' census entry, with its surveillance code, and Owen's face in the snow. She looked at Henry Adler. I need everything you have on the Hale family, she said, going back as far as the records go. And I need someone who can explain to me in practical terms what the current governance framework does and does not recognize in terms of pre-system territorial claims. Henry Adler looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Cale. She is going to be very good at this, he said. Cale, by the door, said nothing. But she heard, without looking, the shape of what was in his silence. She looked at the table. She was ready to begin. The truth about the Hale family arrived in 3 stages. The first stage was the archive. Henry Adler had access to the court's historical records in a depth that made the documents from Cale's wooden box look like a summary. Centuries of formal proceedings, territorial agreements, inter-pack correspondence, and the private council minutes that were not available to the general pack system and had never been meant to be. He sat with Alara for 2 days going through them, moving chronologically forward from the period of the restructuring, building a map of names and decisions and outcomes that, when assembled, told a story with the coherent, terrible logic of things that were planned rather than accidental. The Hale family had been present at the original restructuring. She had known this from Cale's documents. What she had not known was the nature of their involvement. They had not merely been present as one interested party among many. They had been the coordinating force, the family that had organized the coalition of packs that had agreed to remove the Vale Authority and divide the old territory between the new pack system. The family that had drafted the administrative reclassification of the Vale mark. The family that had provided the language that turned a bloodline's governance role into a hereditary condition, something medical and meaningless rather than historical and significant. 300 years of careful work, begun by people long dead and continued by each generation that followed, who had been raised on the specific combination of ambition and fear that made certain families capable of sustained, patient harm, not rage, not impulse, the organized, generational kind that plans beyond the planner's own lifetimes. The second stage was Owen. He arrived at the court under escort on the 9th day after Alara reached it, brought not under force but under the particular pressure of being formally requested to attend by the Alpha King's office, which was not an invitation anyone in the current pack system refused without serious consequence. He came in looking like a man who had decided, on the journey, exactly how much to say and in what order, and who was working very hard not to let the effort of that decision show on his face. Alara met him in a room she had chosen specifically for the meeting, one of the smaller side rooms in the court complex, with 2 chairs and a window that looked out onto the stone courtyard, and nothing on the walls that would give him information about where she stood. She had chosen this room and she had chosen to be in it alone when he came in, without Henry Adler and without Cale, and she had thought about this decision carefully before making it. Owen looked at her across the room. She looked at him. "I am not going to ask you why," she said. "I already know why. I am going to ask you something different." He sat down in the chair across from her, which was a small tell. He sat without being invited, the automatic ease of someone who was managing his own anxiety, by choosing the familiar action of sitting, rather than standing. "What?" he said. "I want to know what they told you," she said, "about what I am, and when they told you." He pressed his hands together between his knees. He looked at the window. 3 years ago, he said. Before you and I ever worked together. She had expected this. She sat with the weight of it anyway. "They told you to get close to me," she said. "To watch," he said. "Just to watch. To note what records I accessed. Who I spoke to. Whether I ever—" He stopped. "Whether I ever found out what I was," she said. "Yes," he said. "And in 3 years of watching me," she said, "what did you report?" He looked at her finally. "That you were careful. That you read everything but made no connections. That you were—" He stopped again. "Say it," she said. "That you were easy to manage," he said. "Because you trusted the people around you." She looked at the window. The stone courtyard outside was quiet in the late afternoon light. She thought about 4 years of shared shifts and borrowed flour and soup on her doorstep and easy laughter, and she let herself feel the specific sorrow of it, not rage, because rage was a luxury she did not have time for right now. The precise, calibrated grief of understanding that a thing she had been genuinely grateful for had been partly constructed for a purpose she had not known. Partly. She held on to that. "The soup," she said, "when I was ill. The times you covered my shifts without being asked." He looked at the floor. "Were any of those things genuine?" she said. A pause long enough to be its own answer. "Then, most of them," he said. "They were not all." He stopped, and the stopping was more honest than anything he could have said. "You can stop talking now," she said. He stopped. She sat for a moment. Then she said, "What do you know about the 6 people from the old community? The ones who were left 20 years ago?" He looked at her with something that was close to alarm. "I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do," she said. "The census records. The community of 63 that became 6. You worked in the same archive room I did. You accessed the same records I accessed. You were trained to know what you were looking at. What happened to those 6 people?" He was very still. "I only know about 2 of them," he said finally. "Then tell me about those 2, she said. he told her. One of them had died naturally, 12 years ago, an old woman whose mark had never been activated, who had lived in a settlement in the far north, and who was recorded in the community census as the last of her branch of the bloodline. The other was alive, living under a different name, in a town 2 days' travel from the court, running a small medical practice. Their mark was documented in the surveillance records as inactive, suppressed, the same notes that had been in the files on her parents. She made a note of the name in the town. She did not let her expression change. "Is that all you know?" she said. "Yes," he said. She stood up. "You are going to stay at the court for the next 2 weeks," she said, "not as a prisoner. As someone whose assistance Henry Adler may require in working through the surveillance records, because you know the coding system and he does not." She looked at him. "You can refuse. But if you refuse, you leave the court with nothing, and the Hale family will eventually work out that you spoke to us, and you can make your own calculation about what that means for you." He looked at her. "You are not angry," he said. It was half statement, half confusion. "I am angry," she said. "I am angry in a way that would take more time to describe than I currently have." She met his eyes. "But anger is not useful right now, and you are, so I am choosing what is useful." He nodded slowly. "I am sorry," he said. "I know," she said. "That is also not currently useful." She left him in the room and went back to the work. The third stage of the truth arrived in the form of a letter. It came to the court addressed to the Alpha King and was opened in the formal manner. Witnessed, documented, the seal recorded before the wax was broken. The seal was the Hale family crest. The letter was from the current head of the family, a man named Gerald Hale, and it was written with the polished, formal composure of someone who had practiced the language of political correspondence for many years and knew exactly how to say a threatening thing while making it look like a concern. It said, with many more words arranged around the edges, they knew Elara was at the court. They were aware of the claims she might be making about the old territory and the old bloodline. They wished to express that the current territorial system was stable and effective, and that any attempt to introduce destabilizing historical claims into the current governance framework would be, in their assessment, harmful to the stability and well-being of the PAC community as a whole. It used the word stability 4 times. It did not mention the mark. It did not mention the surveillance records. It did not mention 63 people and 20 years and 6. It was very careful, and it was very clear, and it was the letter of a family that had spent 300 years being careful, and was now watching something they had worked very hard to prevent moving toward them anyway. Elara read it. She sat with it for a while. Then she picked up a pen and wrote her response. She wrote it herself, which was not the protocol. Responses to family correspondence of this level were typically drafted by Henry Adler and reviewed by Cale. She wrote it herself, and she wrote it in the formal register she had learned from the court documents, with the careful legal language that she had read enough of now to use with precision. She wrote, "The Vale bloodline is active. Its claims are historical, legal, and will be fully substantiated through the court's archival process. No claim is being made that would disrupt the current governance structure and its functional elements. What is being made is a claim to the interpretive authority that the restructuring removed, and the restoration of that authority to its proper place within the governance framework. The family of Hale is invited to review the relevant archives, which are available to any interested party through the court's formal access process." She did not mention what she knew about the family's role in the restructuring. She did not mention the surveillance records. She did not mention 63 people. She wrote at the very end, "The mark does not end. It was not said by me. It was said by the ones who came before me, and they were right, and here we are." She signed it with the mark symbol, drawn freehand, exactly as it appeared on the old map and on her wrist, and beneath it her name. She handed it to Henry Adler. He read it. He looked at her. "I am going to need to send this with a full diplomatic escort," he said. "That is fine," she said. "The last line is going to have an effect," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is supposed to." He held the letter for a moment. "You are certain?" She thought about the stone room in the Ashwood, about the carved symbol above the fireplace, about the registry with its 300 years of careful entries, and the last writer pressing the pen harder than they needed to while they wrote that it was not finished. "Send it," she said. Henry Adler sent it. She went to find Cale. He was in the room he used as an office, which looked like every other room he inhabited. Functional, organized, nothing decorative except the same flat stone with its white line that she had noticed on the cabin shelf, and that had appeared, she now understood, in every space he used as a working base. She had stopped asking about it. It was the kind of thing that had an explanation she would be given when the time was right. She told him about Owen's information, about the survivor, about the letter she had sent. He listened to all of it. When she was done, he looked at her. "You sent it without asking me to review it," he said. "Yes," she said. "Should I have reviewed it? Did you want to?" She looked at him steadily. "You told me the first night in the cabin that I had done the right thing. You told me in the Ashwood that the territory was mine. You told me in this court building that my function is interpretive authority." She paused. "A letter to the family that has been suppressing my bloodline for 3 centuries falls within the interpretive authority." He was quiet. "Yes," he said. "It does." "Then I did not need your review," she said. "I made the right call." He looked at her with the expression she had been watching for weeks, the one that was not quite the smile but occupied the space beside it. "You did," he said. She nodded. She sat down in the second chair in his office. They sat together in the quiet of the room, with the fire between them and the work on the table, and the letter already traveling toward the Hale family, and everything that came after that still ahead. Complicated, uncertain, very large. She was not afraid of any of it. That was new. She sat with the newness of it and let it be what it was. Not the absence of fear exactly, but the presence of something stronger. The specific confidence that comes not from certainty about outcomes but from clarity about who you are when things get hard. She knew who she was. She had not known that before the woods. Now she did, and it was enough to walk forward on. She found the survivor on the 14th day after arriving at the court. She went alone, which was a decision she made carefully, and did not discuss with Cale until the morning she was leaving, when she told him where she was going and why she needed to do it without him. "She is the last living person from the old community," Elara said, "and she has been hiding for 20 years. If she sees me arrive with the Alpha King, she sees a threat. If she sees me arrive alone, she sees the mark," Cale said. "Yes," Elara said. "That is what I need her to see first." He had looked at her for a moment with the expression that meant he was weighing her reasoning against his concern for her safety, and finding that her reasoning was better than his concern. "Take the route Henry Adler maps," he said, "and send word when you arrive." "I will," she said. "Elara," he said. She turned. He was standing in the doorway of his office. The flat stone with the white line was on the shelf behind him. The morning light from the window was cold and direct, and it caught his face in the specific way that showed the lines of it, the years in it, the care in it, the thing that was always present and always held. "Come back," he said. 2 words. Like all right. Like I know. "I will," she said. She left. The town was 2 days' travel, and she covered both days at a pace that was comfortable, without being slow. She thought as she walked. Not about the Hale family or the court records or the letter she had sent, but about smaller things. About the way the land changed as she moved further south, the air warmer and the snow thinner, the landscape softening from the hard winter country she had been in for weeks. About Nora, who was settled at the court in a working capacity that suited her. She had an instinct for administrative organization that Henry Adler had spotted on the 2nd day, and had not been willing to give back since. About the old registry and the weight of it in Cale's hands when he had carried it out of the stone building. About what she was going to say to a woman who had been hiding the mark on her wrist for 20 years. The medical practice was exactly where Owen's records had placed it, a modest building on a side street of a moderate town, the sign outside giving a name and the word physician, and the hours of availability. She stood outside it for a moment in the gray afternoon, and looked at the sign. The name was not the name from the old census. It was the name of a woman who had reinvented herself, but the address matched, and the age matched, and the mark would match. She went in. The waiting room was small and clean, 2 chairs and a desk where a young assistant looked up from his work. She asked for the physician by the name on the sign. The assistant told her to wait. She sat. The woman who came through the inner door 10 minutes later was perhaps 60 years old, with gray in her hair and the careful posture of someone who had learned to hold themselves in a way that attracted no particular attention. She looked at Elara with the professional assessing gaze of a physician meeting a new patient. Then she looked at her wrist. She stopped. Elara held her arm out, wrist up, the mark visible. The physician, who had once been recorded in a census under a different name as a member of the last living community of her bloodline, looked at the mark for a long moment. When she looked up, her face had done something Elara recognized from her own mirror, the specific reorganization that happens when a thing you have stopped believing in becomes undeniable. "You are real," the physician said. "I keep hearing that," Elara said. The physician walked to the door and turned the sign to closed and said something brief to her assistant, who gathered his things and left with the practiced discretion of someone who had been trained to recognize when that particular tone of voice meant the next hour was private. She led Alara into the back room and closed the door. Her name, she said, had been Leora before she had changed it. She said it the way people say names they have not used in 20 years, with a careful, uncertain reverence, as if testing whether it still fit. She had been 19 when the people she had grown up with had died, one by one, across a period of 7 years, from illnesses that she had at the time accepted as misfortune, and had later, from a safe distance and with the benefit of medical training, understood were not random. She had changed her name and her location and covered the mark and become someone else. She had told herself it was survival, which it was, and that it was temporary, which it was not, and that one day when things changed she would be herself again, which she had stopped believing in approximately 15 years ago. She asked Alara how many others there were. "I do not know yet," Alara said. "I know about you. Owen's records mentioned one other." "Owen," Leora said flatly. "You know him." "I know of him," Leora said. "I know what his function was. I stayed out of the range of people like him for 20 years, very deliberately." "He is currently assisting the court's archive review," Alara said. Leora looked at her. "You did not arrest him." "He was a tool that other people used," Alara said. "He is now a tool I am using. The function is similar, the direction is different." Leora was quiet for a moment. Then something in her face shifted. Not a smile exactly, but the beginning of one. "The old records described the interpretive authority as being specifically about finding what was fair, rather than what was convenient," she said. "I can see why that was threatening to certain people." "I am still learning what it means," Alara said. "You already know," Leora said. "You just did it." Alara looked at her. "Will you come back with me?" "Not permanently. Not yet. Just to speak to the court. To be recorded in the archive as living. She paused. "To make it real, that there is more than one of us." Leora looked at her hands. She was quiet for a long time. "I have been someone else for 20 years," she said. "I know," Alara said. "I do not know how to be Leora again." "I did not know how to be myself again either," Alara said. "I learned while walking." Leora looked at her. "That is not reassuring," she said. "No," Alara agreed. "It is true. Which is better?" Leora closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had settled in her face, the specific settling of someone who has made a decision they have been postponing for a very long time and found, in the making of it, that it was lighter than they expected. "Give me a day to arrange things here," she said. Alara stayed the night and they talked until the fire burned low, about the old records, about the community, about what Leora remembered of the governance role and the old stories she had been told as a child before she had understood what they meant. She remembered more than she had thought. The kind of knowledge that survives in the body even when the mind believes it has forgotten. They traveled back together. When they entered the court, Henry Adler saw Leora's mark before she was introduced and looked at Alara with an expression that had several things in it, the topmost of which was, "You went and came back with more than you left with." Cale was in the main hall. He looked at Alara. He looked at Leora. He looked at Alara again. "There are two of you," he said. "There are at least two," Alara said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded in the way that was not social acknowledgement, but something older and more specific, the same nod Clara Weston had given her. "Then we begin properly," he said. She looked at him. "We began 2 weeks ago," she said. "No," he said. "We assembled. There is a difference." He held her gaze. Two living members of the old bloodline, standing in the court, with the mark active and the archive in process, and the letter already in the hands of the people it needed to reach. He paused. "Now we begin." She thought about the stone building in the Ashwood, about the carved symbol and the old registry, and the sentence that said the mark does not end. She thought about standing on the raised ground in the circular clearing in the center of the old territory, with the wolf inside her coming back to life beneath her feet. She looked at Cale. She looked at Leora. She looked at the court around her. "All right," she said. "We begin." Gerald Hale arrived at the court on a Tuesday. He did not send word ahead. He arrived with 4 attendants, which was within the formal protocols for a family head visiting the Alpha King's court, enough to signal consequence without constituting a formal delegation. His arrival was noted at the gate, communicated to Henry Adler, and Henry Adler brought the information to Alara before he brought it to Cale. She was in the archive room with Leora, working through the 3rd century records with the focused attention that had become the rhythm of their days at the court. They had found 2 more names in the surveillance archives, both listed as locations unknown, and had been working outward from those records, mapping the network of the community's dispersal. Henry Adler appeared in the doorway. "Gerald Hale is at the gate," he said. Elara set down the document she was reading. "What did he say?" she said. "That he has come to speak with the Alpha King on a matter of territorial concern," Henry Adler said. Leora, across the table, did not look up from her own document. "He came in person," she said. "Not a second letter. Not an intermediary." "No," Henry Adler said. "He is afraid," Leora said. Elara thought about this. The letter she had sent. The mark drawn at the bottom of it. The words, "The mark does not end," in her handwriting, with her name beneath them. She had intended it to move him. She had apparently moved him enough to bring him here in person, which was a different kind of response than she had predicted. "Where do you want to receive him?" Henry Adler asked her. She looked at the archive room around her, at the documents on the table, at Leora's marked wrist resting on the surface between them. "Here," she said. Henry Adler looked at the archive room. He looked at her. "The archive room is not a formal receiving space," he said. "No," she said. "It is where the records are. It is where we work. It is where the evidence of what his family did for 300 years is currently spread across this table." She met Henry Adler's eyes. "I want him to see where we are working. I want him to see what we are doing." Henry Adler looked at Leora. Leora, who had still not looked up from her document, turned a page. "Bring him in," Leora said. Henry Adler went to get Gerald Hale. Elara stood up from the table. She straightened the document she had been reading and set it to one side. She did not clear the table. The records stayed where they were, spread out, visible, the evidence of 3 centuries of a governance record that the Hale family had spent 3 centuries pretending did not exist. She stood at the head of the table and waited. Gerald Hale was a man of perhaps 65, tall, with the kind of bearing that comes from decades of being the most significant person in any room he entered. His clothing was expensive in a restrained way, the kind of expensive that does not announce itself because it does not need to. He came in through the archive room door with 2 of his attendants, who stopped at the threshold when they saw the room and the documents and the 2 women standing in it. He looked at the table. He looked at Elara. He looked at Leora. He looked at the mark on Elara's wrist, which was at her side, uncovered, visible in the afternoon light from the window. He looked at the mark on Leora's wrist. He was very still. "Mr. Hale," Elara said, "please sit down." He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who had not expected to be directed to sit in a room he had entered expecting to direct. Then he sat down, because the documentation spread across the table told him something about the situation he was in, and he was a man who had survived as long as he had by reading situations accurately. She sat down across from him. "You have read the archive records," he said. His voice was controlled and precise and gave almost nothing away. "Yes," she said. "How much?" he said. "Enough," she said. He looked at the documents. She watched him assess how much of what was visible on the table he could read from where he sat, and she had arranged it so that the answer was more than he wanted to see. "I received your letter," he said. "I know," she said. "The last line was," he paused. "Accurate," she said. He looked at her. It was aggressive. "It was honest," she said. "Those are sometimes confused for each other." He pressed his lips together. Not anger, adjustment. He was rearranging, she could see it, recalibrating the parameters of this conversation, based on information he had not fully had before he walked in. "What do you want?" he said. "The same thing I said in the letter," she said. "The restoration of the interpretive authority to the governance framework, not the dismantling of the current PAC system, not the redistribution of any territorial claims, the function that was removed 300 years ago, put back where it belongs." He looked at her steadily. "And you believe you are the one to hold it?" "I am the last active mark on record," she said. "Except for Leora." She gestured. "Who is currently reviewing the 3rd century documentation?" Leora turned a page. Gerald Hale looked at Leora with the look of a man encountering something he believed he had dealt with. "She has been in that town for 20 years, he said. Not quite a statement, not quite an accusation. "Yes?" Leora said without looking up. "I was under the impression that was the intended outcome. You are welcome." He looked at Elara. "You found her," he said. "The records found her," Elara said. "I simply read them correctly." He was quiet for a long moment. She watched him think. Watched the careful, practiced calculation of a man who had spent his life managing power, and was now assessing a situation in which the power was arranged differently than he had believed. There will be resistance, he said, from the other families. From alphas who have held their territories under the current system for generations and will not welcome the introduction of an authority they cannot control. I know, she said. That is why the court's backing is necessary, and why the archival record matters. He looked at the documents again. You intend to make all of this public, he said. The archival process is formal and documented, she said. It will be available through the court's public record in due course. He looked at her. She met his gaze. Including your family's role in the restructuring, she said. He was still. That is the part you came here to prevent, she said. I understand that. I want you to understand something in return. She put both hands on the table, the marked wrist visible. I am not interested in punishing your family for what was done 3 centuries ago by people who are not you. I am interested in what is done from now forward. He looked at her hands. The record will stand, she said. What happened will be documented. It will be in the archive. But the response to it is not about the Hale family. It is about the function that was taken, and what restoring it will require. She held his gaze. Your family's cooperation with that process is what I am asking for. Not your guilt, not your apology, your cooperation. He was quiet for a long time. He looked at the documents. He looked at Leora. He looked at Ilara. My grandfather's grandfather made a decision, he said, and every generation since has maintained it. Because dismantling what he built would have required admitting what he did, and no family. He stopped. No family wants to be the one that says it, Ilara said. He looked at her. Your family can be the one that ends it, she said. That is a different thing entirely. He pressed his hands flat on the table. He looked at the mark on her wrist. He looked, for a long time, at the carved symbol on the cover of the old registry, which was sitting on the shelf behind her. I will need to speak to the family council, he said. Of course, she said. It will take time. I know, she said. We have been waiting 300 years. A few weeks is manageable. He looked at her with an expression she had not expected to see on his face, something adjacent to relief, as if carrying the secret of what his family had done had been a weight that was heavier than the alternative, and he had been waiting, without knowing it, for someone to give him the mechanism for putting it down. He stood up. I will be in contact through the formal channels, he said. That would be appropriate, Ilara said. He looked at her one more time, at the mark, at the documents, at the room. Then he left. Henry Adler closed the door behind him. The archive room was quiet. Leora set down her document and looked at Ilara. You gave him a way out, she said. Yes, Ilara said. He does not deserve one. No, Ilara said. But the process needs his cooperation more than it needs his punishment. That calculation matters more than what he deserves. Leora was quiet for a moment, then she nodded. The door opened. Kale came in. He had not been in the room for the meeting. She had asked him not to be. The Alpha King's presence would have made the conversation about power rather than record, and she had needed it to be about record. He looked at the room. He looked at her face. He cooperates, she said. You don't know that yet, Kale said. He will, she said. I gave him the language for it. He will use it. Kale looked at her with the expression she had been watching for weeks, the careful containing one, and this time she looked back at it directly and let it be seen, and did not make it easy for him to put it away. Say it, she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. Kale, she said quietly. He crossed the room. He stood in front of her. He was close enough that she could see the detail of his face, the years in it, the steadiness of it, the specific thing that had been in it since the morning she had asked him if he knew what was happening between them, and he had said yes. I love you, he said. I have been trying to find the correct time to say it for 2 weeks, and I have decided there is no correct time. She looked at him. That is accurate, she said. Which part? Both parts, she said. She stepped forward. She took his hand, both hands, holding the marked wrist between his palms the way he had not touched it, had never touched it, had been waiting. She let him hold it. She felt his hands, warm and steady, around the mark that 3 centuries of people had tried to erase, and her wolf, fully awake, fully present, more herself than she had ever been, settled into a stillness that was not the stillness of absence but of arrival. I love you too, she said. I have known it for longer than is reasonable, given how long we have known each other. 2 weeks in a cabin is a long time, he said. It is, she said. He was looking at her face with the look that was not the careful, contained one, the one underneath it, "What do you want?" he said. She thought about Caden in the ceremony clearing, about the thread that had gone quiet, about 2 years of making herself small. She thought about the stone building in the Ashwood, and the mark on her wrist, and 63 people, and 20 years, and a family that had spent 3 centuries afraid of what she was. She thought about a cabin and 2 cups of tea, and a man who had mended her dress and told her to take the bed and said goodnight in the dark when the snow stopped, and had waited, with the absolute patience of someone who understood that waiting was the only honest thing to do. "This," she said, "I want this." He held her hands. Outside the archive room, the court continued its ordinary work, the formal sounds of an institution that had stood for generations and would stand for more. Henry Adler was in the corridor, giving discreet instruction to the staff about the afternoon's schedule, not looking at the closed archive room door with the very deliberate attention of someone choosing not to look. Leora had returned to her document. She turned a page. The fire in the archive room was warm. The records were on the table. The old registry was on the shelf, its cover worn smooth by 3 centuries of hands that had kept it and passed it on and kept it again, trusting the future to arrive. It had. She was it. She was here. Caden Vale was in Harrow territory with his chosen bond and his careful ambitions and whatever version of the story he was telling himself about the woman who had walked out of his ceremony, and she thought about him the way you think about a storm that passed through a place you no longer live in. Real, once. No longer relevant. She had not become who she was, despite what he had done to her. She had become it because she had chosen to walk into the woods and keep walking, and the woods had given her back something that had always been hers. She held the Alpha King's hands in the archive room on a Tuesday afternoon, in a court that was becoming, piece by piece, what it needed to be. The mark on her wrist breathed in the warm air. No one would cover it again. No one would try. The days that followed were not simple. Nothing about what came next would be simple, and she had known this since she stood in the center of the circular clearing with the ancient planted trees around her, and felt the land through the soles of her feet. Simple was not the destination. The destination was right, and right things are almost never simple, but they are navigable if you approach them one step at a time, with enough honesty to correct yourself when you go wrong. Gerald Hale spoke to his family council. The response came back in 4 days, which was faster than she had expected, and told her that the council had been waiting for exactly this conversation, that somewhere in the Hale family, over 3 centuries, the weight of what they were carrying had become heavier than the comfort of not setting it down. The response was formal and careful and worded with the precision of people who had good lawyers and used them, but at its core it said, "We will cooperate with the archival process. We will not obstruct the restoration of the interpretive function. We ask in return that the court's formal record reflects the cooperative nature of the resolution." It was not an apology. It was an arrangement. Alara had expected nothing more and was satisfied with nothing less. She and Henry Adler spent 6 days drafting the formal framework, the language that would introduce the Vale Interpretive Authority into the current governance structure, in a way that was legal, precedented, clear in its scope, and defensible against the challenges that would inevitably come from the alphas who would find it inconvenient. Clara Weston's offer of support had been formalized into a written alignment. 2 other alphas had made contact through court channels after Gerald Hale's visit became known, neither yet ready to commit formally, but asking questions that suggested commitment was coming. Leora worked alongside her through all of it. She had been a physician for 20 years, and an administrator before that, and her ability to identify the weaknesses in a drafted framework, the places where a determined opponent could find ambiguity and exploit it, turned out to be exactly as valuable as Alara had hoped. They worked together with the easy efficiency of people who share a particular kind of vision, and do not need to explain themselves to each other from the beginning. On the 8th day, a letter arrived from a town in the far north. It was written in a careful, uncertain hand, and it was addressed to the court in general because the writer did not know a specific name to address it to. It described a mark on an inner wrist. It described having seen a document, the writer did not specify where or how, that described the mark in terms the writer had never seen before. It asked, in a single sentence at the end, whether there were others. Alara read it twice. She went to find Cale. He read it once. 3, he said. At least 3, she said. He handed it back. "What do you want to do?" he said. The same question he had asked in the archive room. The same tone. Not directing, not guiding, not suggesting. Simply asking, with the absolute trust of someone who had decided to believe in the answer. She looked at the letter. "Write back," she said, carefully, "through the right channel so it cannot be tracked to us easily. Tell them yes. Tell them they are not alone. Tell them to wait for more contact when we are ready to make it safely." He nodded. "And then," she said, "we find whoever else there is." She had been doing the math. The dispersal records suggested dozens of family lines scattered across the territories over 300 years. Most would have lost the knowledge of what they carried. Some would have marks that had never activated. Some would be in places so distant and so absorbed into other pack communities that the connection to the old bloodline would require significant archival work to establish. It was not a small task. It was not a short one. But it was the task, and she had learned in the woods that the only way to do a task correctly was to begin, and to continue, and to correct, and to not stop until it was done. She began. Cale was beside her in the way that was not the way of a king keeping watch over a subject and not the way of a man trying to manage the woman he had chosen. It was the way of a person who was in this, genuinely, completely, in the middle of it rather than at its edges, who had brought the whole weight of his authority and his archive and his 13 years of experience to bear not in control of the process but in service of it. She had not known that was possible. She had not thought to want it because she had not known to believe it existed. She was wrong about many things, it turned out. This was the best one. On the 15th day she stood in Cale's office in the late afternoon and looked at the flat stone on the shelf with the white line through it, and finally asked about it. He picked it up. "It came from a river near the territory where I grew up," he said. "A long way from here." He turned it over in his hands. "Declan gave it to me. He said," he paused, "he said to keep it on every desk I ever worked at, so that I never forgot what it looked like when two things that are different from each other find the place where they meet." She looked at the stone. The dark gray, the white line running through it, clean and exact, the meeting point of two different kinds of stone pressed together over a very long time. She understood why it was on every desk. She looked at Cale. He was looking at the stone. His face had the quality she recognized from mentions of Declan, the same absolutely level quality of something held by practice rather than by ease. She had stopped trying to make it easier. She simply let it be what it was, the presence of a grief that had become part of the architecture of who he was. Not the whole of it, but a beam in the frame. "He would have been interested in all of this," she said. Cale looked up. "Yes," he said. "He would have asked very inconvenient questions about the legal framework." "Was he also in governance?" she said. "He was a historian," Cale said. "Specifically of the 3rd century. Specifically of the restructuring period." He paused. "Which is how I first encountered the Vale records. He left his notes to the court archive when he died. I read them 3 years after. That is when I understood what I was looking for." She sat with this. A historian who had died, whose notes had been left in an archive, which had been read by the man who loved him, who had gone looking for something and found her in the woods that sat on her blood's ground. 13 years of absence and a flat stone with a white line, and notes in an archive. Things moved toward each other by roads that were not visible until they were traveled. "Thank you," she said, "for reading the notes." He looked at her. "Thank him," he said, quietly. "I intend to," she said, "in the way you thank someone who is not present by using what they left behind." He was quiet. Then, "That is a good way," he said. She stood up and crossed to the shelf and picked up the flat stone and held it for a moment. Two different kinds of rock, the white line between them, the place where they had met, under pressure and over time, and become one object with two natures and a line down the center that was not a break but a record. She put it back. She turned around. "I am going to need to go back to the Ashwood," she said. "Before winter is fully done, the old registry should not stay in that building alone." "No," he said, "it should not. And the clearing needs to be formally documented," she said, "as a heritage site under the court's protection, so that no territorial dispute can be brought over it. Henry Adler can start that process tomorrow," he said. "Good," she said. She looked at the window. Outside the court buildings were settling into the blue-gray of early evening. Lights appearing in windows, the ordinary machinery of the place continuing its steady work. She had been here 15 days and it already felt less foreign than the Harrow Pack had in 4 years. That told her something. "Cale," she said. He was at the desk, writing. "I want to go back to the Ashwood in the spring," she said. "And I want to bring you. And I want to stand in the clearing again." He looked up. "When the snow is gone," she said. "When you can see what it looks like without the white." "All right," he said. "I want to see what is there," she said. "What the ground looks like when winter is done. What grows in the center of the old territory when it has been left alone long enough for things to grow back." He was looking at her in the way she had learned was not the containing one, was in fact, The one beneath all the others. The one that required no management, and no precision, and no care about how it landed. Things will grow back, he said. Yes, she said. They always do. She sat down across from him at the desk. She picked up a pen. She had work to do. They worked together in the evening quiet of the office, the fire between them, the flat stone on the shelf, the letter from the north sitting answered on the desk. Outside, the world was exactly as large and as complicated as it had always been. Nothing simplified. Nothing resolved beyond what had been resolved. Everything that was difficult still requiring the daily choice to face it. She made the choice the way she made everything now. With both hands, with the mark visible, with her wolf awake and attentive and fully, completely, entirely hers. The ceremony clearing was very far away. She did not miss it. She was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was made for, beside the person who had been looking for her before he knew her name. That was the story of how she came home. Not to a place she had left. To a place she had never been before, that turned out to be where she had always been going. The woods had known. The mark had known. She knew now too. And knowing was enough to begin again from.